Hey guys, tonight we slip into the twilight of ancient Rome, where the air is thick with wood smoke, roasted olives, and the occasional whiff of something less pleasant because, let's be honest, the Roman sewer system wasn't always up to the task. You walk the narrow, cobbled lanes, shadows stretching long as oil lamps flicker, and the whole city seems caught between exhaustion from the day and a simmering anticipation for the night. Already voices echo, vendors still hawking figs, gamblers shouting at dice, and somewhere a drunken soldier belting a song he probably doesn't even know the words to. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting peace and quiet. This is Rome at its loudest, most restless hour. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along with the crowd, sandal soles slipping against uneven stone. On one side, a baker scrapes soot from his oven, the smell of charred bread clinging to his tunic. On the other, a lantern swings above a doorway, the painted sign creaking, half amphora, half crude figure, just enough to tell the initiated what kind of services await inside. This isn't the polite marble Rome of triumphal arches and gleaming temples. This is the underside, the half-hidden economy that thrives when the sun dips. The streets pulse with it. Young men with flushed cheeks stagger out of taverns, clutching each other's shoulders. You see women leaning from doorways, calling in sing-song tones, bracelets glinting in the torchlight. Their voices are playful, persuasive, but also weary. You can hear how many times the Sam. Words have been rehearsed tonight alone. A couple of them laugh too loud, mocking a passing senator who pulls his cloak higher, pretending he doesn't hear. Historians still argue whether senators actually avoided these districts or secretly funded them, but your gut says it was a little of both. Rome's energy is chaotic, a blend of industry and indulgence. You catch sight of children darting between legs, chasing after tossed coins. Somewhere nearby, a butcher slaps down a haunch of meat with a wet thud. Yes, the shop is still open at this hour, because who doesn't crave questionable street food after midnight? Meanwhile, just beyond the stalls, darker corners glow faintly with oil lamps, signaling rooms for rent by the hour. The mainstream historical fact here: prostitution in Rome was widespread and legal, though taxed and registered. Women, and sometimes men, were required to enter their names in official rolls, stamped forever as part of a trade that could never be undone. And so, walking these streets, you realize the paradox: a profession openly tolerated, yet permanently branded as shameful. But let's sprinkle in a quirk. Did you know some brothel keepers allegedly used little bells above their doors, almost like ancient ding-dong chimes announcing customers as they stepped in? Imagine every awkward entry accompanied by a cheerful jingle, hardly discreet, but very Roman. The crowd presses on, and you follow. The stones glisten with spilled wine and who knows what else, and you tug your cloak tighter, though the warm night doesn't warrant it. The air tastes of iron, salt, and fermented grapes. You pass a man selling roasted chickpeas. He winks, then shouts after you, "Better snack now, cheaper than regrets later." That's Rome's humour for you. The lanes narrow, quieter now, though not silent. You hear hushed conversations, negotiations in doorways, coins counting out, promises exchanged. The women shift in the shadows, adjusting tunics. Some dyed bright with cheap pigments that bleed in the rain. Others wear little jewelry, a single bangle to catch the light. Their eyes meet yours, some bold, some tired, some calculating how long until dawn. You realize their entire livelihood depends on standing here, calling, waiting. One pauses to powder her hair with pale dust, a trick to make herself stand out in the gloom. Historians still argue whether that powder was chalk, ash, or even flour, but you know whatever it was, it wasn't comfortable. She sneezes softly, laughing at herself. then waves at you with mock flirtation. You wave back, more amused than charmed. A dog trots past, ribs showing, tail wagging as it noses for scraps. A man throws a bone, and the animal scampers off. You watch as the man ducks into a side door, greeted with soft laughter, the curtain falling behind him. You stop for a moment, taking it all in. Above you, the stars are barely visible, drowned by smoke and lamplight. The city is alive, not in the polished sense you might expect from marble statues and clean museum halls, but in the messy, human rhythm of sweat, hunger, and survival. And here, in the twilight of Rome, prostitutes form part of that heartbeat, ignored by historians for centuries, yet vital to the texture of daily life. A mainstream scholar once joked that if you removed all references to prostitutes from Roman poetry, you'd have pamphlets instead of volumes. Poets like Juvenal and Martial never tired of mocking, praising, or scandalizing them. And yet beneath the sarcasm you sense a strange acknowledgement. These women, for all their marginalization, were unavoidable. You continue walking. A gust of wind lifts the hemong. If your cloak, carrying with it the mingled notes of incense and fried fish. A street musician plucks a lyre off-key, crooning about love, betrayal, and, judging by the giggles of passing girls, probably something more indecent. The music drifts over you, both grating and oddly soothing, like a lullaby with a mischievous twist. Another quirky tidbit? Some Roman prostitutes allegedly carried little lamps carved in the shape of their trade, so even if the customer was too tipsy to remember the address, he could follow the light like an ancient neon sign. Picture Vegas Strip vibes, minus electricity. You glance once more at the doorways you've passed. Some marked with paintings, some with graffiti, some blank, trusting word of mouth. Behind each curtain lies a story of survival, of humor, of exhaustion, and here you are, standing at the threshold of understanding, realizing that this trade wasn't hidden in Rome. It was built into the very stones you walk upon. Your eyelids grow heavier as the city's hum softens into background noise. The cobblestones stretch endlessly, leading you deeper into the night. And though you keep moving, your pace slows, every sound folding into the rhythm of your breathing. Rome whispers, and you follow. You wander further into the Roman night, past the stalls and the smoky torches, until the chaos of the main thoroughfare thins into something slightly less frantic. The Forum is behind you now, though its echoes never really vanish. What rises in its place is the marketplace after dark, a carnival of half-shuttered booths and wandering merchants who never seem to tire. Here, the distractions are endless. A man shouts the praises of his spiced wine, sloshing ladles into chipped cups for anyone with a few coins to spare. Another sells tiny clay lamps, their wicks sputtering, the flames dancing like nervous fireflies. And everywhere you look, there's colour. The reds of cloth rolls, the greens of olives piled high, the glitter of cheap glass beads strung together with more hope than skill. The market at night is a blur of sensation designed to snag your attention before you can think of what you actually need. You pause at a stall where a woman is selling perfumes. She sprinkles oil on her wrist, waving it toward you. The scent is sharp, almost too sweet, like honey left too long in the sun. She smiles knowingly. She's not just selling fragrance. She's selling allure, a shortcut to attraction in a city where competition is fierce. Historians still argue whether Roman prostitutes commonly bought such oils or if they mostly relied on whatever natural charm they could muster. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. After all, who wouldn't want an extra layer of persuasion in a world where even gladiators had marketing strategies? The real mainstream fact is this: prostitutes often worked right here in or around the marketplaces, blurring the line between commerce of goods and commerce of bodies. The very word fornix in Latin, meaning arch or vault, gave us the modern word fornication, because so many women stood beneath those stone arches of markets and bridges to ply their trade. And so, as you stroll past vendors shouting about figs and grain, you realize the whispers nearby aren't always about food. One quirky tidbit comes from the world of street food. Some scholars suggest that prostitutes partnered with snack vendors, using roasted nuts or honey cakes as part of their sales pitch. Imagine it. Buy some chestnuts and, oh, by the way, spend a little extra time with me. A 2-for-1 deal that makes the modern fast food upsell seem tame. You drift deeper into the maze of stalls. A group of men argue over dice, their voices raised, fists slamming the table. Beside them, a woman leans against a post, watching the commotion with a practiced expression. Her eyes dart not toward the winner of the game, but toward the losers, the ones most likely to spend their remaining coins recklessly, looking for comfort after bad luck. She knows the rhythm of the market better than the dice players themselves. Everywhere the marketplace thrums with little dramas. You see a soldier strut past, helmet tucked under his arm, pretending not to notice the giggles of women trailing him. You hear a merchant scolding his apprentice for giving away too many figs for free. You catch the faint hiss of a knife sharpening against stone, the kind of background sound that makes you step just a little quicker. And yet, despite the noise, there's a strange calm. You're aware that this is Rome's version of a mall food court at midnight, chaotic, buzzing, but somehow soothing. People come here not just to buy, but to watch, to mingle, to feel the city's pulse. You trail your fingers along a wooden counter, sticky with spilled wine. The vendor winks at you, sliding over a fig without charge. Maybe he mistakes you for a potential customer. Maybe he just wants to show kindness, or maybe he knows generosity tonight could mean business tomorrow. The prostitutes in this space adapt to the rhythm. Some stand near wine cellars, offering to pour cups, leaning close enough that the drink is never the only temptation. Others hover near the spice merchants, their presence as much a lure as the cinnamon and pepper stacked in neat little piles. Still others follow the gamblers, laughing at their jokes, offering consolation before the dice even stop rolling. One debate among historians lingers. Did prostitutes in marketplaces have official permission, or were they tolerated simply because everyone looked the other way? The records mention registrations and taxes, but they rarely spell out whether these rules extended to the bustling street corners where everyone could see. What you notice as you stand here centuries too late is that, regulation or not, no one is shooing them away. The system worked precisely because it was so entwined with daily commerce. Another odd quirk: graffiti. Not the polished frescoes of villas, but the scrawled words on market walls. Some of these inscriptions advertise women by name, prices included, like the world's first business cards carved into plaster. Others are insults, crude warnings, or bragging notes left by clients. You can almost imagine someone scratching, "Julia is the best for 3 asses," into a wall after a night here, immortalizing his endorsement for any passerby to read. As you linger near one arch, you catch sight of a small clay lamp set on a stone ledge. Its flame flickers low, almost dying. A woman steps out, adjusts the wick, and the light brightens again. That lamp is her beacon, her silent advertisement. You realize that in a world without neon signs, without glowing windows, these tiny flames were the signals that guided customers through the dark. The marketplace continues to hum. A boy chases after a runaway goose, shouting as feathers fly. 2 drunk men sautos tumble into a wine stall, one of them knocking over a jug, red liquid pooling like blood across the stones. The stallholder shouts, but his anger softens when one of the women nearby steps in, laughing, soothing the tension, convincing the men to pay for more than just the broken jug. This is her art, not just seduction, but mediation, knowing when to turn chaos into profit. You find yourself smiling. There's humor here in the absurdity of it all. like the vendor with roasted chickpeas who keeps promising that his snacks will restore lost strength, while winking so aggressively you're sure he has no idea how subtlety works. Or the woman selling garlands of flowers, insisting loudly that her blossoms will keep bad breath away, an ancient mouthwash disguised as a bouquet. Rome was nothing if not entrepreneurial. The marketplace stretches on, and your steps slow. The smells shift: sweet honey, sour wine, pungent garlic. Your ears fill with the rise and fall of hundreds of voices, blending into a kind of lullaby. You realize this is less a place of transactions and more a stage. Every vendor, every prostitute, every gambler and customer is a performer in a nightly play that's been running for centuries. And you, though centuries out of place, are part of the audience. The lamps flicker lower now, the crowd thinning, though never vanishing. You sense that the real action is just beginning behind those curtained doorways and beneath the shadowy arches. The marketplace has served its role: distraction, temptation, and funnel toward the darker quarters of the night. You take one last breath of spiced air, the tang of pepper clinging to your nose, before you let the current of Rome's twilight pull you onward. You drift toward the edges of the marketplace where the bustle quiets just enough for you to notice subtler sounds: the flap of linen curtains, the soft murmur of hushed invitations, the scrape of sandals over stone steps. The air changes too. Gone is the tang of roasted nuts and sharp wine. Now it's thicker, muskier, heavy with oil lamps that have been burning too long. You find yourself staring at narrow facades tucked between warehouses and taverns. Their walls are plain, but the entrances whisper promises. Some of the doorways are framed by faint carvings, worn almost smooth by centuries of touch. You lean closer and make out crude figures, men and women etched in poses so unmistakable that you wonder why the artist even bothered with detail. A few are little more than outlines, like ancient stick figures, while others are startlingly bold, showing gestures that make you raise an eyebrow and then laugh softly to yourself. The Romans didn't bother with subtlety. Their advertising was carved directly into stone. This is your first real brush with the Lupanar, the Roman brothel. The name itself comes from lupa, the Latin word for she-wolf, a nickname the Romans used for prostitutes. It's odd, isn't it, that a word tied to one of Rome's most sacred foundation myths, the she-wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus, was twisted into slang for women who sold their bodies. Historians still argue whether this choice reflected disdain, irony, or simply the Romans' fondness for earthy wordplay. One mainstream fact: brothels were not hidden away. In Pompeii, archaeologists found a purpose-built lupanar right off a busy street, its stone beds still intact. Customers didn't sneak through secret tunnels, they walked straight in, past anyone watching. This openness shocks modern visitors, but to Romans it was simply another trade, like butchery or blacksmithing. The quirky tidbit: the brothel doorways bore signs painted with price lists, almost like today's cafe menus. So-and-so 2 asses, so-and-so 4 asses, a coin here, a coin there, all spelled out for quick decisions. Imagine rushing in after a long day, glancing up at a wall menu and picking your evening like ordering a sandwich. It's strangely efficient. You step closer to one such doorway. The lamplight inside glows amber, revealing a narrow corridor with stone walls rubbed smooth by countless shoulders. A curtain hangs across the first room, and you hear laughter from within, low, practiced, with that unmistakable cadence of a joke repeated many times. The brothel is alive, not with grandeur, but with a strange mix of routine and theatre. You linger at the threshold, watching the ebb and flow of clients. Some stride confidently, tossing coins as if the act itself proves their wealth. Others slink in, cloaks drawn high, eyes darting. One man pauses, nervously rubbing his purse before committing to step inside. You can almost read his internal debate. Is tonight worth the coin, the risk, the memory? And then the curtain swallows him whole. Your feet carry you further, tracing the edges of this district. You pass smaller doorways, less ornate but no less telling. Some are unmarked, relying on word of mouth. Others feature a tiny lamp perched on the sill, the flame just enough to signal business without drawing a crowd. You imagine the women behind those lamps, waiting in silence, rehearsing greetings, wondering whether the night will bring profit or boredom. In your mind's eye, the brothel's interior unfolds. Picture narrow stone rooms, each with a low platform that served as a bed, covered in straw or a worn blanket. Above them, frescoes painted with explicit scenes. Archaeologists once thought these were instruction manuals like IKEA diagrams for intimacy. More likely, they were simply decoration, art that matched the room's purpose. Still, the idea of a nervous customer pointing at a fresco and saying, "That one, please," makes you chuckle. You glance back at the street. A pair of young men stumble past, one leaning heavily on the other. They're laughing too loudly, wine sloshing in their cups. One waves toward a brothel entrance, shouting, "We'll find out if it's true, eh?" His friend groans but follows. You shake your head, amused, realizing some jokes don't change after 2,000 years. Historians debate whether these brothels were seen as dens of vice or just another necessary outlet. Some argue they protected respectable women by providing alternatives. Others suggest they symbolized Rome's hypocrisy, a city that praised virtue while quietly profiting from vice. What's certain is that lupanars existed in every quarter, from shabby outskirts to districts near the Forum itself. The ground under your sandals feels damp, slick with spilled oil. You imagine the hum of voices echoing inside, layered with the creak of beds, the clink of coins, the occasional burst of song from someone more drunk than satisfied. This is not a place of romance. It's transactional, blunt, yet still threaded with the same humanity you've seen in markets and taverns. Another oddity, some brothels allegedly issued tokens, small clay or bronze pieces stamped with symbols. Customers could buy them in advance, then redeem them like coupons. Imagine collecting loyalty points at your local lupanar. 10 visits and the 11th is free. Whether this was widespread practice or just an experiment in a few cities, historians still puzzle over. The night deepens. A cool breeze stirs the lamps, making shadows dance along the walls. You walk slowly now, each doorway another reminder of lives that unfolded here, unrecorded but not forgotten. The women inside these rooms lived their days in narrow cycles, waiting, greeting, bargaining, performing, resting, and waiting again. And though centuries have passed, their presence clings to the stones. Your thoughts drift toward the sheer resilience required to stand in these doorways night after night, to wear the carved figure of a she-wolf like a badge, to laugh with strangers, to haggle over coin, and to retreat into silence when the curtain falls again. You can almost feel their footsteps lingering under yours. You pause one last time at a doorway where the carving is nearly gone, just a faint outline of a woman's figure. Your fingers trace the stone, cool and rough. The carving might fade, but the memory it carries will not. And as you step back into the street, the city's hum rises again, pulling you toward whatever comes next. The brothels of Rome are not hidden now. They stand open, marked by crude art and whispered invitations, as much a part of the city's identity as its triumphal arches. You take a deep breath of smoky, perfumed air, steady yourself, and keep moving deeper into the night. You walk onward, leaving behind the archways with their half-erased carvings, and the city breathes differently now. The marketplace hum has faded into the distance, and in its place rises a slower rhythm, almost like the beating of a drum muffled under blankets. You are following the trail of scent, sweet myrrh, sharp frankincense, pungent oils that cling to the air long after the women have dabbed them onto their necks. This is the world of preparation, the behind-the-scenes rituals that Roman prostitutes wove into their days long before you ever glimpsed them at the threshold of a lupanar. Imagine yourself slipping through a narrow doorway into a small room lit by a single lamp. The light paints everything in warm bronze, softening cracks in the plaster and turning even plain objects into silhouettes with secrets. On a low table lies a comb carved from bone, its teeth worn but still sharp. Beside it, jars of ointments and powders are scattered, some stoppered tightly with wax, others left open, so that their fragrances leak into the air. Here, grooming is not vanity, it is survival. A woman's livelihood depends on how convincingly she can weave allure out of simple tools. She dips her fingers into a dish of olive oil and smooths it through her hair, coaxing a dull brown into something glossy under lamplight. The oil doubles as moisturizer, a shield against Rome's dust and sun. You can almost hear her sigh, the same sigh you'd give while standing in front of a mirror before a night shift. A mainstream historical fact slots neatly into this moment. Roman prostitutes, like many Roman women, often styled their hair elaborately, sometimes with towering curls and braids held in place by pins of bronze, silver, or even bone. Hairstyles were status symbols, broadcasting not only beauty but also the suggestion of connection to fashion-forward elites. The irony: a prostitute could mimic an aristocrat's hairstyle, but the borrowed glamour never erased the legal stigma etched onto her name. Now for a quirk: some of those hairpins doubled as tools for self-defense. Archaeologists have unearthed pins long and sharp enough to stab. Picture it: you're adjusting your curls one moment and the next you're using the same accessory to poke an overeager drunk who doesn't understand the word no. Fashion and function, Roman style. You watch as another woman lifts a small pot filled with powdered lead. She dabs it onto her cheeks to pale her skin. It's unsettling, because you know now that lead poisoning was no joke. But in this dimly lit room, the pale skin makes her stand out, makes her look refined, exotic, worth the coin. Historians still argue whether the women understood the risks or shrugged them off in favor of immediate gains. What's clear is that beauty was both armor and hazard. The ritual continues. Rings slide onto fingers, cheap bronze ones mixed with an occasional flashy glass gem that catches the light just enough to look expensive. A necklace of colored beads jingles faintly as she bends over to adjust her sandals. Perfume is dabbed not only on the neck but behind the knees, a detail mentioned in Roman satire, because, as one poet slyly hinted, every part of the body was subject to scrutiny. The room smells like a heady cocktail: olive oil, myrrh, stale straw from the bed, and the faint tang of sweat. You wrinkle your nose, then laugh quietly at yourself. This isn't the luxury spa of your modern imagination. This is DIY glamour, assembled with patience and pragmatism. One woman picks up a polished piece of bronze, using it as a mirror. Her reflection is warped, but she squints, adjusting the line of her kohl around her eyes. You notice how steady her hand is, practice carved into muscle memory. Another woman hums softly while plucking stray hairs with tweezers. The hum grows louder, almost a song, until she laughs and stops, muttering about how she can't carry a tune. You smile. Humor seeps in even here. Historians debate whether prostitutes had access to imported luxury cosmetics or relied mostly on local concoctions. The satirists mocked them for using cheap perfumes that smelled more like goat than rose, but archaeology has revealed jars once holding frankincense resin imported all the way from Arabia. Which was it? Probably both. Some women splurged, others improvised, and the market supplied whatever people were willing to pay for. The quirky fringe tidbit, crocodile dung. Yes, you heard right. Some Roman cosmetic recipes, borrowed from Egyptian traditions, called for mixing animal dung with oils as a form of skin cream or even sunscreen. You chuckle, remembering how earlier you noted chalk or flour dust in hair. Clearly the line between grooming and comedy was thin. Imagine selling yourself with the slogan, "Tonight I smell faintly of Nile crocodile, but at least I won't sunburn." As you watch these preparations, you realize how much time is consumed by waiting. Hours spent adjusting a curl, smoothing a tunic, checking and rechecking a bracelet's clasp. All of it designed not for the women themselves, but for the fleeting approval of whoever might walk through the curtain. It's both empowering, control over appearance is control over fate, and draining, a loop of endless repetition. A soft knock at the door interrupts the rhythm. A girl enters, perhaps a servant carrying a fresh jar of oil and a bowl of figs. The women share the food, laughing between bites, oil glistening on their lips. The figs vanish quickly, seeds crunching between teeth. It's a reminder that behind the perfumes and jewelry, they are still human, still hungry, still tethered to the same needs as anyone else. One woman leans back on her elbows, sighing. If Venus herself walked through that door, she'd still have to pay taxes, she mutters. The others laugh, though there's an edge of bitterness in it. They know she's right. Registered prostitutes were obligated to declare their trade, and once inscribed in the official rolls, they could never wash the label away. Grooming might hide wrinkles, but no amount of powder erased that legal stain. You imagine them finishing their rituals, hair pinned, skin powdered, tunics adjusted to reveal just enough shoulder, lamps trimmed so the light flatters rather than exposes. Then, with a deep breath, each woman slips back to her station, doorways, arches, tavern corners, where the night will judge their efforts. You sit with the thought that grooming here is theatre. Each comb stroke, each dab of oil, each flick of coal is a rehearsal for the performance ahead. And like all actors, these women know that when the curtain rises, their roles must be flawless, even if the audience is drunk, distracted, or cruel. You pull your cloak tighter, stepping back into the Roman street. The faint traces of perfume cling to you, carried on the breeze. The night feels thicker now, charged with the weight of expectation. Somewhere, laughter bubbles from a tavern. Somewhere else, a man shouts for more wine, and just ahead the faint light of another lupanar doorway flickers, promising the next scene in this unfolding play of the Roman night. You shuffle further down the dim street, cloak brushing against rough stone walls, and the air changes once more. The smells of perfume and oils give way to something harsher. The metallic tang of coins clinking in pouches, the sharp scent of sweat mingling with spilled wine. This is the world of bartering, the dance of prices and promises. Rome at night is not just about pleasure, it is about negotiation, and here every whispered word carries the weight of a transaction. A woman leans against a doorframe, bracelets clattering faintly as she shifts her arm. She doesn't call out, not this time. Instead, she waits, watching a group of men argue in low tones just a few steps away. One of them gestures with his purse, the strings stretched taut as if the weight of coins is an argument all its own. You catch fragments of their exchange, 2 asses, too steep, but she's worth it. The bargaining is direct, a currency of desire that leaves no room for romance. The mainstream fact here is simple but striking. Prostitution in Rome was priced along a wide spectrum. The cheapest encounters might cost just a single coin, an as barely more than the price of a loaf of bread, while high-class courtesans could command sums that rivaled a soldier's monthly pay. It wasn't a uniform trade, it was an economic ladder, and every rung carried different expectations. One quirky tidbit that makes you smile. Some ancient graffiti records exact prices. In Pompeii, scratched into plaster, a proud customer boasted, "Athos for 2 asses is worth every coin." Imagine Yelp reviews immortalized not online but on walls, echoing through centuries. You can't help but wonder if Athos ever saw that graffiti and rolled her eyes, muttering, "Thanks for the free advertising, I guess." You pause as another negotiation unfolds. A man, perhaps a freedman, judging by his shabby but not destitute clothing, haggles with a woman draped in a tunic dyed a faded blue. She names a price. He scoffs. She lowers it slightly, tilts her head, lets the lamplight catch the glint of her earring. He hesitates, then relents. The coins jingle, a sound that feels almost ritualistic in its finality, and just like that, he disappears through the curtain. Historians still argue whether these prices were fixed by custom or wildly variable depending on mood, appearance, and the desperation of both parties. Some suggest prostitutes had to adhere to strict limits, especially those registered under official roles. Others claim it was entirely situational, with cunning negotiators able to drive up their worth. As you watch, you sense the truth lies in the space between, sometimes rigid, sometimes flexible, always dictated by the balance of power in that moment. The bartering isn't always about money, though. You overhear snippets where wine, bread, or even clothing is offered in exchange. One woman laughs sharply at a man who suggests paying with a half-empty amphora. She flicks her hand dismissively, retorting that she can get better wine for free if she just waits by the tavern long enough. Another woman, though, accepts a cloak in exchange for her time, draping it over her shoulders with a small, satisfied smile. Transactions adapt to circumstance. Survival is currency too. You drift past a tavern door, the smell of sour wine spilling out. Inside, you see men slouched at tables, cups raised, eyes glazed. A woman pours drinks, her tunic slipping from one shoulder, laughter bubbling from her lips. But you can tell the laughter is a tool, honed and sharp, calculated to coax another round from men too far gone to notice. Here, the prostitution is folded into the very act of serving wine, the line between waitress and lover blurred to invisibility. The coins jingle again, this time in the hands of a boy no older than 12. He darts between customers, carrying messages, fetching food, even running small errands for the women themselves. You realize the ecosystem is bigger than the transaction. It's a whole web of lives feeding from the same stream of money. Every coin that changes hands trickles outward, to innkeepers, to food vendors, to lamp makers. The economy of desire keeps countless others afloat. One odd fringe fact, some Roman prostitutes wore small tokens around their necks, stamped with their prices, almost like price tags at a modern store. You chuckle at the absurdity. What could be more transactional than literally advertising yourself like produce? It sounds crass, but in a way, it gave clarity. No room for confusion, no haggling if you didn't want to. You pause beside a wall where faint graffiti curls across the plaster. The words are almost illegible, but you pick out 3 asses and not worth it. Another review, this one bitter. It's a reminder that for every satisfied customer, another left grumbling, scratching complaints into stone like the world's most permanent customer service hotline. You imagine the women rolling their eyes. Great, now my wall score is ruined. The haggling isn't limited to men. You catch sight of a woman negotiating with another woman, their voices soft but firm. Whether companionship, comfort, or something more, the transaction is the same. Coins exchanged, curtain parted, privacy purchased. Rome didn't always fit into neat categories, and the market reflected that fluidity. Your sandals scuff over cobblestones worn smooth by countless negotiations. Each stone feels almost alive, humming with echoes of barters past. You realize the act of haggling itself was part of the allure. For some men, the game of bargaining was as exciting as what followed, the back and forth. The pretend reluctance, the satisfaction of shaving off a coin. It was foreplay in its own way, layered into the rhythm of Roman nights. The humour seeps in when you overhear one man loudly insisting he can get a better price down the street. The woman he's bargaining with shrugs, unimpressed, and replies, "Then enjoy your walk." His friends roar with laughter, and he flushes red, tossing down the coins anyway. You smile. Rome was nothing if not a city where wit could turn the tide of a deal. Historians still debate whether the Roman state's taxation of prostitutes was fair trade or exploitation. Officially, the tax gave them legitimacy. In practice, it siphoned away their already slim earnings, enriching pimps, landlords and bureaucrats more than the women themselves. You imagine the frustration, grooming for hours, bargaining for coins, and then watching a chunk of it vanish into someone else's purse. Survival was not only a matter of allure, but of constantly recalculating whether the night had been worth it. The clinking of coins grows softer as you move on, but it lingers in your ears, like a refrain. Every purse you hear opening is a reminder that Rome's nights were powered by more than wine or laughter. They were powered by the endless arithmetic of value, desire, and compromise. And as you step away from the tavern glow and the curtained doorways, you can't shake the sound. Clink, clink, the rhythm of Rome's underworld economy, beating in time with your own footsteps as the night stretches ahead. You walk onward, drawn by a faint shimmer of lamplight that seems different from the others. The glow here isn't just practical, it has the softness of reverence, as though even the darkest corners of Rome still found room for the sacred. You realize you've stumbled upon a peculiar phenomenon. The shrines inside and around the lupanars, those small altars dedicated to gods who watched over, or perhaps judged, the trade of desire. At first glance, it seems contradictory. Here you are, in the shadow of brothels, listening to coin clinks and drunken laughter, and yet right in front of you is a niche carved into a wall. A tiny figurine rests there. Venus, goddess of love and beauty. Her face is worn, her body chipped, but the pose is unmistakable, eternal, serene, inviting. At her feet are small offerings, a clay cup with stale wine, a sprig of rosemary, even a few copper coins dulled by time. You can't help but marvel that faith and commerce coexisted so seamlessly. The mainstream fact: brothels often featured small shrines to Venus, Priapus, or Mercury. Venus was obvious, goddess of love and desire. Priapus, the rustic fertility god, was invoked for his exaggerated attributes, a symbol that guaranteed prosperity and potency. Mercury, god of trade, may seem out of place, but then you realize prostitution was, above all, a business transaction. It made perfect sense to invite the god of merchants into the room. You peer closer at another carving nearby, Priapus, frozen mid-smirk, his form so exaggerated you nearly laugh aloud. Romans placed statues of him not just in gardens, but in brothels, taverns, and even doorways. The logic was part superstition, part comedy. Priapus was thought to ward off evil, and his bawdy presence turned embarrassment into ritual. Imagine decorating your workplace with a mascot that was half sacred, half prank. The quirky tidbit comes from Pompeii. Archaeologists found frescoes of Priapus weighing his member on a set of golden scales, as though comparing it to wealth. The message was clear: fertility and fortune were two sides of the same coin. You chuckle, imagining Roman customers chuckling too, reminded that their pockets and passions were forever entwined. You linger by one shrine as a woman kneels briefly, murmuring words you can't quite hear. She lights a tiny lamp, its flame trembling. Was it a prayer for luck? protection from violence, more customers. Historians still argue whether prostitutes sincerely worshipped in these spaces or if the shrines were more for show, reassuring clients that the gods blessed their choices. But as you watch her steady gaze, you sense both survival and sincerity in the act. Faith, after all, often thrives strongest where life is most precarious. The scene reminds you that religion in Rome wasn't compartmentalized. You didn't only worship in marble temples under priestly supervision, you worshipped at kitchen hearths, in marketplaces, on street corners, and yes, even in brothels. The divine was everywhere, threaded into daily life as casually as buying bread or pouring wine. You glance down and notice a scattering of amulets left at the base of one shrine, tiny charms carved in bone and bronze, eyes to ward off curses, phalluses to ensure vitality, even a miniature hand making a rude gesture thought to repel bad luck. Romans carried these trinkets everywhere, talismans against the evil eye. Here in this setting, the symbolism is sharp, protection in a world where disease, violence, and shame lurked at every doorway. Another oddity you recall, some scholars believe that incense in brothels wasn't just about atmosphere or piety, but also a clever attempt at fumigation. The heavy smoke of frankincense or myrrh may have dulled odours and even carried mild antibacterial properties. You smile at the thought, ancient Rome's version of scented candles, a blend of faith and Febreze. The night thickens, voices muffled as though the shrines impose a kind of quiet respect. Even drunken men step around the altars carefully, tossing a coin or muttering a half-hearted prayer. Maybe they hoped Venus would forgive their indulgence, or Priapus would ensure their evening didn't end too soon. You realize these shrines were more than decoration. They were bargaining chips with fate. You watch as another man, older and clearly wealthier by his robes, pauses to pour wine onto the ground before entering a brothel. The liquid glistens briefly, then vanishes into the dust. He nods once toward the shrine, a gesture both humble and hurried. It strikes you that faith here wasn't about grandeur but about insurance. Tiny rituals performed quickly in hopes that the gods were listening. Historians debate whether these acts were sincere piety or just social habits. Was the wine for Venus a heartfelt offering or just a reflex, like knocking on wood? You'll never know. But as the scent of incense wraps around you, the distinction seems irrelevant. What matters is that belief, even in small doses, was woven into the very fabric of nights like this. Humor returns when you imagine the god's perspective, Venus rolling her eyes at the endless prayers of men asking for stamina, Mercury keeping careful ledger books, noting each coin exchanged, Priapus laughing endlessly, his shrine plastered with offerings that were both earnest and absurd. You smirk, realizing Romans were nothing if not pragmatic in their theology when, in doubt, bribe every god within reach. The lamps flicker lower, shadows lengthening around the shrines. A stray cat whines between your legs, pausing to sniff at the rosemary left at Venus's feet before darting off. The small details tug at you, crumbled offerings, cracked statues, wax hardened on stone. These weren't grand gestures, but small acts repeated night after night, layering devotion over desire until the two were indistinguishable. You take a step back, letting the murmur of prayers, the faint clink of coins, and the heavy perfume of incense wrap around you. The shrines have done their work. They've transformed a space of transaction into one of strange sanctity. Whether blessing, disguise, or placebo, the gods were present here, and in that presence, the women and men of Rome found just enough reassurance to carry them into another night. Your footsteps echo softly as you move away, leaving Venus, Priapus, and Mercury to their watch. The city resumes its hum around you, laughter, bartering, footsteps, shouts. Yet somewhere in the background you can still feel the weight of those little shrines, as if the gods themselves linger just behind your shoulder, amused and watchful as you continue deeper into Rome's twilight. The further you walk, the heavier the air feels. You have left behind the laughter of taverns and the flicker of shrines, and now the walls close in. The street narrows until you find yourself facing a squat stone building, its doorway dark except for the dull glow of a single lamp. There is no grand facade, no marble columns, no sweeping entrance. Just a crude lintel above the door, carved with symbols you've already come to recognize, faded figures whose meaning leaves little to the imagination. You hesitate, then step across the threshold, and the sounds of Rome outside muffle into a steady hum. You are inside the lupanar. The air is thick, warm, and faintly acrid, smelling of oil smoke, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of coins. The narrow corridor stretches ahead, flanked by small stone doorways. Curtains of coarse cloth hang across them, though a few are pulled aside, revealing shadowy interiors. Each room is no bigger than a cupboard, its walls pressed close, its floor bare save for a slab of stone that serves as a bed. You glance at one, noticing the thin layer of straw scattered across the slab, a tattered blanket thrown over it. Comfort is not the point here, function is. A mainstream fact anchors your impression. Archaeologists excavating Pompeii uncovered exactly such a brothel, complete with stone beds, frescoes of erotic scenes above each doorway, and grooves in the floors where countless sandals had worn the stone smooth. Those frescoes, still startlingly vivid, show positions and acts in graphic detail. Historians still argue whether they served as advertisements, instruction manuals for illiterate customers, or simply decoration. Whatever their purpose, they leave little doubt about what these rooms were built for. You step closer to one wall and trace a painted figure with your eyes. The colours have faded, but the energy remains, a frozen gesture of intimacy painted centuries ago, meant to tease, instruct, or entertain. You can't help but smile at the idea of Roman patrons pointing up at these frescoes, using them as a menu. "That one, please," a drunk soldier might have said, slurring his words, and the women inside rolling their eyes as they went through the motions. The quirky tidbit that drifts into your mind: in some rooms, archaeologists found crude graffiti scratched right beneath the frescoes. Names, boasts, insults. One reads, "Myrtis is the best, I had her twice." Another, "Gaius was here, and he was cheap." The walls became a strange kind of guest book, immortalizing not just the business but the egos of its customers. You imagine the women laughing or groaning when they saw their names etched forever in plaster. You move slowly down the corridor, ears pricked to the sounds leaking from behind curtains. A muffled laugh here, a rhythmic creak there, the clink of coins, the rustle of straw. Some rooms are silent, women sitting cross-legged on stone slabs, waiting for the next client. Others are busier, voices overlapping in a jumble of business and banter. The atmosphere is not hushed, not ashamed. It's businesslike, pragmatic, though threaded with moments of weary humour. In one corner, a woman adjusts her tunic while chatting with another across the hall. Their laughter rings oddly bright against the stone walls. You realise that for them, this is less a temple of desire and more a workplace, with colleagues and gossip, jokes and rivalries. Historians still debate how much camaraderie existed among prostitutes, whether they saw each other as allies in hardship or competitors for scarce coin. Watching these two lean toward each other, sharing laughter in the dim light, you sense that survival often required friendship. You pause in a room where the lamp flickers low, illuminating a carved phallus hanging on the wall. Such talismans were common in Roman spaces, not only as decoration, but as protective symbols meant to ward off evil. You smirk at the thought, Rome's equivalent of a lucky horseshoe except shaped very differently. Even here, in the most transactional of settings, superstition found its way onto the walls. The floor beneath your feet feels uneven, worn smooth by endless footsteps. You imagine the steady procession of sandals day after day, night after night, each leaving an invisible imprint. The brothel is less a secret place and more a machine, its cogs turning ceaselessly, powered by coin, appetite, and necessity. Another odd tidbit, some Roman brothels reportedly kept price lists posted near the entrance with symbols or abbreviations indicating the cost of particular services. Picture a fast food menu, except painted on plaster. The efficiency is almost comical. Customers didn't have to ask awkward questions, they just pointed and paid. Whether all lupanars used this system or only the busiest ones remains uncertain, but the Pompeian evidence suggests at least some did. As you linger, you feel the heaviness of the space pressing in. The rooms are small, cramped, devoid of privacy. Each curtain is thin, letting sound and even smell drift between chambers. It's impossible to forget you're part of a larger structure, part of a communal rhythm of trade. Privacy is an illusion, replaced by routine. You think of the women sitting here night after night, their bodies folded into the same narrow slabs, their lives bound by the same endless repetition. Yet humour flickers even here. From one room you hear a man boasting too loudly about his military victories, only to be met with a woman's sarcastic retort. If you fought as well as you brag, you'd be emperor by now. Sheich! His friends erupt in laughter, and even you can't help but grin. Some things never change. Ego, banter, and the occasional sharp tongue that cuts through pretension. Historians still argue whether these brothels were regulated as safe spaces or tolerated as dangerous necessities. Were they protected by law or left to the mercy of pimps and landlords? The truth likely shifted depending on the district, the wealth of the clientele, and the willingness of authorities to look the other way. The ambiguity lingers like the lamplight, never steady, always flickering. You trail your fingers along the cool plaster, pausing beneath another fresco. The figure here is almost playful, the colours brighter than the rest, as if time has spared this one wall. You wonder who painted it, whether they ever imagined their work would survive volcanic ash and centuries of ruin. Did they think it was art? Instruction? A joke? Perhaps all three. Your breath grows slower as you take it all in. The narrow rooms, the worn beds, the murals and graffiti, the lingering smell of oil and sweat. This isn't the polished Rome of marble statues and Senate speeches. This is the Rome that existed in shadows and side streets, the Rome lived by ordinary people whose names rarely entered history books. The brothel hums around you, timeless in its rhythm. Curtains sways, coins clink, laughter rises, silence falls, and you, centuries removed, stand in the middle of it, listening, breathing, learning. You feel both out of place and deeply connected, a guest in a world that is both alien and achingly familiar. When you finally step back into the corridor, the lamplight flickers, guiding you toward the exit. The stone doorway frames the street outside, where voices rise again, where the night continues without pause. You glance once more at the frescoes, the graffiti, the worn slabs. The lupanar doesn't beg for your sympathy or your judgment. It simply exists, a relic of lives lived in the margins, echoing across centuries with their unvarnished truth. You step outside, the cool air of the Roman night washing over you like a sigh. Behind you the brothel breathes on, its lamps glowing, its walls whispering. Ahead of you, the city stretches endlessly, promising more secrets, more shadows, more stories waiting to be uncovered. You step back onto the street, the brothel's heavy air still clinging to your cloak like smoke, but now the night carries you further. Rome is vast, and what you've just seen is only one layer of its labyrinth. The city's women of the night are not all the same, and you quickly begin to notice the spectrum of difference, an unspoken hierarchy stretching from the roughest corners of the street to the candlelit villas of the elite. You wander toward a wider avenue where the buildings stand taller, their facades less crumbled, their doorways framed by polished stone instead of rough plaster. The torches here burn brighter, and the laughter drifting from within sounds smoother, more practiced. This is where you begin to grasp the gulf between the courtesans and the streetwalkers. A mainstream fact helps set the stage. Roman society recognized stark divisions in prostitution. At the bottom were the street prostitutes, fornicariae, who worked under arches, in taverns, or in brothels like the one you just left. They were cheap, accessible, and often mocked in poetry. At the higher end were the meretrices, the courtesans, some of whom entertained wealthy men in more refined surroundings. They were not only companions but also conversationalists, musicians, and even poets themselves. Some climbed high enough to influence politics, scandalizing senators and delighting gossip-hungry crowds. You imagine one such courtesan now, reclined on a cushioned bench in a villa's atrium. Her hair is coiffed with imported pins, her tunic dyed in costly purple hues forbidden to ordinary citizens. She sips watered wine, with languid grace, her laughter deliberate, her words carefully chosen. This is not the hurried bargaining of the street. This is performance art, where intellect and beauty blend into currency. And then you picture her counterpart, a streetwalker you passed earlier, leaning in the cold shadows of an archway, tunic plain and sandals worn, her body the only lure she can offer. Her voice is sharper, her wit quicker, because she has seconds to catch a customer before he disappears into the crowd. Historians still argue whether courtesans enjoyed real power or only the illusion of it. Some suggest they wielded genuine influence, shaping politics from the bedroom. Others argue they were simply tolerated playthings, useful until discarded. What's certain is that their lives differed drastically from the women who huddled under arches with nothing but a lamp and hope. The quirky tidbit: some courtesans became celebrities, their names whispered across Rome like modern influencers. Take Volumnia Cytheris, a freedwoman who became the mistress of Marcus Antonius and was seen riding beside him in a chariot, scandalizing the city. Imagine a prostitute not only accepted at elite banquets, but paraded like a star on the political stage. That was Cytheris, both admired and despised, a reminder that the line between shame and fame was perilously thin. You move through the avenue, feeling the shift in atmosphere. Here the doorways are guarded by discreet servants, their expressions carefully neutral. Customers approach with measured confidence, not the boisterous swagger of tavern drunks. Coins still clink, of course, but the sums exchanged here are heavier, and the deals extend beyond flesh. Gifts of jewellery, promises of patronage, even whispers of political favours. You think back to the graffiti in Pompeii praising cheap encounters for a few asses, and the contrast makes you chuckle. Rome truly was a city where you could buy both a hasty tumble in a straw-filled room and an evening of cultured conversation with a woman dressed finer than your wife, depending only on how many coins jingled in your purse. The streetwalkers, however, remain the majority. As you retrace your steps toward the busier alleys, you see them again, their presence unglamorous, yet essential. One woman leans against a column, yawning openly, tapping her sandal in irritation at the slow flow of customers. Another sits on a low stool, humming a tune while she fiddles with a broken bracelet. Their lives are less about luxury and more about endurance, hours of waiting, nights of repetition, mornings of exhaustion. A soldier lurches toward one, grinning, his arm outstretched. She sizes him up quickly, calculating whether his coin pouch is full or merely jingling with pebbles. Her negotiation is brisk, efficient, a survival skill honed sharper than her wit. Within moments they vanish behind a curtain, leaving only the echo of their departure. Historians debate whether these women ever had the chance to climb the ladder toward courtesanship, or if the divide was unbridgeable. Was it possible for a clever, beautiful streetwalker to rise into the ranks of the elite, or was birth and patronage the deciding factor? Some rare cases suggest upward mobility, but most evidence points to a rigid divide. The hierarchy was not only about wealth but about visibility. Some were allowed to shine, while others were fated to remain in the shadows. You notice the humour that sometimes bridged the gap. Roman satirists loved to poke fun at men who paid top coin for courtesans when the same service, they joked, could be had for a fraction in the back of a tavern. One biting epigram. Reads something like, "Why spend a fortune when the archers are crowded? You smirk, recognizing the eternal sting of buyer's remorse." The difference extends beyond money and reputation. Courtesans had time for preparation, perfume, jewelry, carefully rehearsed lines of poetry. Streetwalkers relied on immediacy, a flash of skin, a quick smile, a teasing remark shouted into the night. Courtesans cultivated mystery, streetwalkers thrived on visibility. Both roles required resilience, but of very different kinds. Another quirky tidbit, some courtesans wrote letters or poetry themselves, fragments of which survive in Roman literature. Imagine a prostitute whose verses were read aloud at banquets, her wit admired by senators who simultaneously condemned her trade. It is a reminder that even in stigmatized roles, intelligence and creativity found ways to survive. The night deepens, and you feel the weight of these contrasts pressing on you. You think of the lupanar's narrow stone rooms, then of the courtesans' cushioned villa benches, and you realize they represent two poles of the same spectrum, both bound by stigma, both bound by the coin, yet separated by a chasm of status and perception. You hear laughter again, sharper this time. Two women at a street corner are teasing each other, mocking a customer who tried to haggle too hard. One mimics his whiny tone, "But I only have one coin." The other clutches her stomach, giggling before calling out to a passerby, "Careful, he's very stingy." Their camaraderie feels real, a small burst of light in the dimness. For all the differences in hierarchy, humor remained a survival strategy across every level. Historians still argue whether Roman society saw prostitutes as necessary evils or permanent outcasts. The evidence swings between tolerance and disdain, acceptance and exclusion. But as you stand here, listening to laughter on one street and muted conversation behind a villa's door, the contradiction seems less like a puzzle and more like the essence of Rome itself, a city that thrived on contradictions, living them without apology. You adjust your cloak and continue walking, the voices fading into the night. In your mind's eye, courtesans recline with elegance while streetwalkers lean against cold arches. Two worlds, both bound to the same city, both part of its beating heart, and you, wandering between them, realize you've only just begun to glimpse the breadth of their lives. The night air grows heavier with the scent of wine as you drift back toward the noisy quarters. Rome is a city of taverns, hundreds of them crammed into its twisting streets, spilling out light and laughter like overfilled cups. You approach one now, its doorway glowing amber, voices rumbling like a tide that refuses to ebb. The closer you step, the clearer it becomes that these taverns weren't merely places to drink. They were also stages where prostitutes worked their trade in subtler, more entwined ways. Inside, the floor is sticky with spilled drink. Benches are crowded with men in tunics stained with food and sweat, their arms flung around each other as they bellow songs no one remembers the words to. A harpist strums in the corner, mostly drowned out by the noise, but still plucking away as though the coins tossed her way might double if she plays louder. Above it all, the smell of cheap wine hangs thick, sharp, sour, and oddly comforting. You notice the women right away. They are not tucked away in corners waiting for customers. They are part of the performance. One carries a tray of F-cups, weaving effortlessly between benches, her tunic sliding from one shoulder in a way that draws more eyes than the drink itself. Another sits beside a soldier, laughing at his stories, though her gaze flicks toward his purse every few moments. This is a different rhythm than the brothel. It's slower, less direct, folded into the social whirl of drinking. A mainstream fact anchors what you see. Many Roman prostitutes worked in taverns serving wine while simultaneously selling themselves. Some taverns, in fact, were infamous enough that their very names became slang for brothels. Archaeological evidence shows that taverns often had small back rooms, spaces barely big enough for a bed, where business could be concluded away from the crowd. The quirky tidbit. Roman law technically banned respectable women from working in taverns because the profession was so closely associated with prostitution. Even barmaids were assumed to be selling more than wine. The stereotype became so ingrained that in Roman comedy, a tavern maid is almost always depicted as flirtatious, quick with a drink and quicker with a joke. You chuckle to yourself, realizing how little imagination the playwrights had. They were just copying what everyone saw nightly in these places. You lean against the wall and observe the flow. A group of young men, cheeks flushed, slap the table as they chant for more drink. A woman appears, pouring generously, her laughter rising above the din. She sits down, letting her hand rest casually on one man's shoulder. He beams, convinced of her affection, though you know her gesture is well practiced. Another man tries to pull her closer and she deftly evades, promising she'll return later. Her skill isn't just in allure, but in timing, keeping customers hopeful, keeping purses open. Historians still argue whether tavern prostitutes were considered less respectable than their brothel counterparts, or if the line was too blurred to matter. Some records suggest tavern work carried even more stigma, since drinking itself was often seen as disreputable for women. Yet from another perspective, taverns offered a kind of freedom, the chance to move, mingle, and even sing, instead of waiting in a cramped stone room. You glance toward a side door, half hidden by a curtain. Men slip in and out quickly, their sandals scuffing against the floor. That must be the back room. You wonder how many coins changed hands in there tonight alone, and how many more would before the lamps burned out. The tavern floor is the advertisement, the performance, the bait. The back rooms are where the play reaches its conclusion. Another odd detail, Roman satirists loved to joke about wine prices in taverns being suspiciously tied to the company of the serving girls. 1 cup with water, 1 with a smile, 2 with a kiss, one poet sneered. You laugh at the thought, realizing it's not so different from modern happy hour specials, except with fewer olives and more innuendo. The noise swells again. A man pounds the table, shouting about his victories in the arena. His companions cheer, though you suspect they've heard the story before. A woman leans over, listening with exaggerated awe, then whispers something in his ear. His bravado falters into a grin, and he tosses her a coin. She tucks it into her bracelet with practiced ease. The entire exchange lasts seconds, yet it's the essence of the tavern economy. Drink, brag, flirt, pay, repeat. You take in the details, the flicker of lamps reflecting off bronze cups, the clatter of dice tossed across the table, the wet thud of a wine jug slammed down, and beneath it all, the constant hum of women's voices, laughing, coaxing, negotiating. The tavern is a marketplace disguised as revelry, and its employees are as much merchants as the spice sellers in daylight markets. Historians still debate whether tavern owners acted as pimps, officially taking cuts of prostitutes' earnings, or whether the women paid for space informally. Evidence exists for both. Some contracts even survive, showing tavern keepers renting rooms specifically for this purpose. You imagine the landlord counting coins in the back, smiling as each cheer from the front meant more profit in his purse. A dog trots through the tavern, licking at puddles of spilled wine. One man tosses it a scrap of bread, and the animal wags its tail before slinking toward the door. You smirk. Even the strays seemed part of the nightly rhythm. Then, from across the room, you hear a sharp burst of laughter. A woman has just poured wine into a man's lap, whether by accident or design you can't tell, and his outrage is quickly softened by her flirtatious apology. The room roars with amusement, and you realize that half the entertainment here is not in the music or drink, but in the antics of the women themselves. Another quirky tidbit to savor. Taverns often had names that played on double meanings. One uncovered in Pompeii was called the Inn of the Lustful She-Goat. Subtlety was clearly not their strength. You imagine Romans chuckling as they stumbled toward it, already half drunk, already half decided on how the evening would end. You shift on your feet, feeling the weight of the room pressing in. The heat, the noise, the mingled smells all combine into a haze. It's easy to see why taverns were hubs not only of drinking and sex, but also of gossip. This is where news travelled faster than the forum. Who had been seen with whom, who had lost at dice, who was too stingy to tip generously. Rome's undercurrent of stories flowed through places like this, carried on the laughter of women who knew more secrets than senators. As you step back toward the door, the noise softens slightly. Outside, the cool night air feels like a balm. Behind you, the tavern keeps roaring, lamps flickering, cups clinking, laughter echoing. The rhythm will not end until dawn, and perhaps not even then. For the women working inside, the tavern is both stage and trap, a place where wine smooths the path to profit, but also where danger lurks in every slurred word and staggering gesture. You pull your cloak tighter, the scent of sour wine still lingering in your nostrils. As you walk away, you realize taverns reveal yet another facet of Roman prostitution, not hidden, not silent, but entwined with the very heartbeat of nightlife. A heartbeat loud, messy, and utterly impossible to ignore. Your sandals scrape across the cobblestones as you leave behind the tavern's roar, but the echoes of laughter and clinking cups still ring in your ears. The night feels cooler here, quieter, until your eyes catch a wall glistening faintly in the lamplight. You move closer, and there it is, graffiti. Scratched into plaster, inked in charcoal, painted hastily with red pigment. The voices of Romans long gone, still whispering, mocking, boasting, and many of those whispers you realize belong to the prostitutes and their customers. The first scrawl you make out is crude but oddly funny. Successus, the weaver's son, loves the barmaid Iris. She does not return his affection. The lines wobble as if carved by a drunken hand, and you grin at the eternal tragedy of unrequited crushes. The humour is sharp. You can almost imagine poor Successus staggering home after writing it, only to wake with regret and sore fingers. A mainstream fact settles in your mind. Pompeii, with its tragic preservation, revealed hundreds of such inscriptions on its walls. Many of them reference prostitution directly. Names of women, their prices, and customer reviews scrawled for all to see. This wasn't hidden marketing. It was part of the city's very texture, as ordinary as political slogans or shop signs. One quirky tidbit makes you laugh outright. Some graffiti reads like glowing Yelp reviews. Floronia for 2 asses is very good. Others, however, are cutting complaints. I had Novelia, she is old and cheap. Imagine the awkwardness of walking past a wall only to see your name immortalized as old and cheap for centuries. You can't help but picture the women sighing, "Great, now even the wall's against me." You trail your fingers along the rough plaster, noticing how some messages overlap, newer inscriptions carved over older ones. One name appears repeatedly, Myrtis, sometimes praised, so me times mocked, sometimes simply listed. You realize that for some prostitutes, graffiti was free publicity, spreading their fame or infamy across the city. In a way, the walls became their billboards, etched not with paid advertisements, but with the raw, unfiltered voices of clients. Historians still argue whether prostitutes themselves ever wrote on these walls to advertise or defend their reputations. Some scholars say yes, that clever women may have scratched lines like, "Leader is the best, come find her," to drum up business. Others insist the handwriting and phrasing suggest mostly male authorship. You lean toward the first theory. After all, why wouldn't a savvy businesswoman use the cheapest advertising medium Rome had to offer? Another odd tidbit catches your eye, a drawing of a phallus, crude and oversized, with the inscription Hic habitat felicitas, here lives happiness. You snort softly, shaking your head. Romans had no shame about their humour, and sex was rarely treated with the silence or secrecy modern cultures often attach to it. Here, even the city walls blushed with innuendo. You pause at another inscription that makes your chest tighten. Gaius loves Cornelia, may she always prosper. No mockery, no price, just a tender wish carved for eternity. Was Cornelia a prostitute, a lover, a wife? The ambiguity lingers, reminding you that affection and transaction often overlapped. The walls did not separate intimacy from commerce. They simply recorded whatever emotions spilled out after wine and desire had loosened tongues. The graffiti reveals more than jokes or boasts. It reveals the rhythm of daily life. Notes about dice games mix with notes about women, curses mix with praise, and insults fly as freely as confessions. The walls were Rome's bulletin boards, open to anyone with a sharp tool and something to say. Imagine walking home from work, scratching "Marcus owes me 3 coins" on the plaster, then passing a neighbour writing, "Claudia is hot, ask for her at the tavern." Public and private life meshed seamlessly, every surface a canvas. Historians debate whether graffiti about prostitutes reflected truth or just drunken exaggeration. Were the glowing reviews accurate or just bravado from men trying to impress their friends? Were the insults genuine or retaliation from rejected customers? The walls never answer, but they do reveal how central prostitution was to Roman consciousness. If something fills your graffiti, it fills your society. You lean closer to a particularly elaborate message. It's written in careful Latin, not drunken scrawl. Marcellus had Cytheris. She sings sweeter than the Muses. You blink. That name again, Cytheris, the famous courtesan linked to Marcus Antonius. Could this be genuine or just someone borrowing her celebrity to impress passers-by? Either way, the inscription proves the point. Prostitutes weren't just anonymous figures in shadows. They were woven into Rome's cultural imagination, names etched beside gods and gladiators. Another quirky example makes you chuckle. Secundus screwed here with success. You admire the simplicity, no details, no price, just a declaration of triumph. You wonder if Secundus bragged as he carved it, or if his friends rolled their eyes, muttering, "Sure, buddy, some things never change." As you continue along the wall, the graffiti thickens, layering over itself like centuries of conversations piled on top of one another. A name scratched out angrily, then written again lower down. A crude drawing half-finished, abandoned mid-sketch. A phrase in Greek tucked among the Latin. Evidence of Rome's cosmopolitan blend of languages and cultures. You realize the walls are less a static artifact and more a living palimpsest. Rome's Twitter feed, raw and chaotic. You imagine the prostitutes themselves reading these messages, perhaps laughing at the clumsy poetry, perhaps sighing at the insults, perhaps secretly proud when their names appeared in praise. Did they feel seen, mocked, or simply indifferent? Historians still argue whether graffiti reflects empowerment or exploitation, but you sense that, at the very least, it made them unforgettable. Their names, carved into stone, resisted the silence that otherwise swallowed most of their stories. Humor lightens the mood again when you stumble upon a line that reads, "Take your girl to see Victor the Gladiator, better than the Lupanar." You laugh out loud, shaking your head. Even then, Romans were comparing entertainment options. Gladiator or prostitute, dice game or tavern, choices, choices. The lamplight flickers across the wall, casting shadows over the words. You step back, letting your eyes take in the whole surface. Hundreds of scratches, each one a voice frozen in time. Some boastful, some bitter, some tender, some crude. Together, they form a chorus that reveals the texture of Roman nights more vividly than any marble inscription in the Forum. The air grows cooler as the night deepens, and you know you can't linger forever. Still, the graffiti clings to your mind, etched as sharply as if you had scratched it yourself. The prostitutes of Rome may not have left memoirs, but their names, their reputations, and their echoes remain carved into plaster. And as you turn away, you realize that the walls of the city have become storytellers too, whispering through centuries, refusing to let anyone forget the lives that pulsed here after dark. The graffiti fades into the shadows as you keep walking, and for the first time tonight, the noise of Rome softens. The taverns are behind you, the brothels are quiet for a moment, and the street seems to pause. You find yourself imagining what happens during the long stretches of silence in these women's lives, their hours of waiting. For all the clinking of coins and bursts of laughter, much of their time is filled with boredom. You lean against a column and picture the scene inside a lupanar at midday when the city bakes under the sun and customers are scarce. A woman sits cross-legged on her stone bed, fiddling with her necklace, then tossing it aside. Another reclines against the wall, tracing patterns in the dust with her toe. The lamp is unlit, and the air hangs still. No coin jingles, no footsteps echo, just waiting. A mainstream fact strikes you. Prostitutes in Rome often spent long hours idle since demand surged mainly at night or during festivals. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows graffiti carved by the women themselves during these lulls, little doodles, games of tic-tac-toe, or their names etched into plaster. These marks are not desperate cries, but tiny acts of killing time. The quirky tidbit: dice. Prostitutes were known to gamble during slow hours, tossing knucklebones or carved cubes on the stone floor. One satirical poem mocks women who lost the night's earnings by noon, gambling away their bedsheets. You chuckle at the thought. Imagine working all night only to blow your wages on a bad throw of dice before lunch. Some things never change. You watch in your mind's eye as two women gossip, their voices low, their words slipping between complaint and laughter. "He promised he'd come back," one says, rolling her eyes. "So did the last 10, the other replies, both of them laughing. Gossip fills the empty hours like mortar between stones. Holding their fragile camaraderie together, they trade stories of rude customers, of funny accidents, of whispered dreams that may never leave these walls. Historians still argue whether prostitutes in Rome found real friendships among each other or if competition drove them apart. Some evidence suggests alliances, shared meals, mutual defense against violent clients. Other texts paint them as rivals, undercutting each other's prices and sniping over customers. As you picture the two women laughing, you sense the truth was a messy blend, rivalry by necessity, friendship by survival. You move back onto the street and notice a woman perched on a low stool, her chin propped in her palm, eyes half closed. She looks as though she's been sitting there for hours. The lamp beside her burns low, wax dripping onto the stone. Every so often she glances up when footsteps approach, only to sigh when the figure keeps walking. The monotony weighs on her shoulders. You feel it in your own bones. The humor of the situation isn't lost, though. Imagine a woman yawning so wide that when a potential client finally arrives, she greets him mid-yawn, or another passing the time by making sarcastic commentary to herself. Oh, look, another drunk senator, what a surprise. You smile faintly. Sarcasm, you realize, is timeless. Waiting also bred creativity. Some women sang softly to themselves, others mended clothes, others braided each other's hair. Archaeologists found combs, needles, and scraps of fabric in brothel ruins, suggesting that idle hours were filled with practical tasks. A half-finished embroidery might sit on a bed, never destined for sale, but serving as a way to keep hands busy and minds calmer. You pause at the thought of music. Roman prostitutes were sometimes entertainers too, singing or playing instruments to attract attention. Imagine the sound of a flute drifting from behind a curtain, not professional, not polished, but enough to lure a lonely man closer. Music softened boredom and sharpened business. Another quirky detail: pet animals. Some sources mention women keeping small dogs or birds for companionship. Picture a woman stroking her lapdog absent-mindedly while waiting, whispering secrets into its ears she'd never share with customers. The dog, wagging its tail, becomes her confidant in a world where trust is scarce. Historians debate whether the state acknowledged these stretches of inactivity. Taxes were levied regardless of how many customers came through the door, meaning slow days could push women into debt. Some scholars suggest pimps enforced quotas, punishing women if earnings fell short. Others argue that business was so steady in Rome that idle hours were rare luxuries. The truth once again likely shifts depending on street, season, and festival. You imagine the mood as hours drag on, frustration building, laughter fading, minds wandering. A woman hums a tune just to fill the silence. Another scribbles a doodle of a gladiator on the wall. Someone else falls asleep sitting upright, jerking awake when footsteps finally approach. The hours are elastic, stretching unbearably, then snapping suddenly when a customer arrives, demanding attention and performance as if boredom never existed. Humour cracks through again when you consider what must have been the world's earliest version of customer reviews happening live. A bored woman sighs, "Well, at least he paid in full." Another retorts, "Yes, but his sandals smelled worse than goats." Laughter bubbles up, cutting through the monotony. Even in waiting, they find material for jokes. The rhythm of Rome's prostitution was not all frantic lust and coins. It was punctuated by silence, by long afternoons of nothing, by the slow tick of oil dripping from lamps. Those hours shaped the women as much as their customers did, breeding resilience, wit, and boredom so profound it etched itself into the very walls. As you walk further, the street quiet around you, you feel the weight of that waiting settle in your chest. It is not glamorous, not scandalous, not even particularly sinful. It is ordinary, long hours of simply being, of sitting and watching the world pass by. And yet, in that ordinariness lies the truest glimpse of their lives. Not every moment was a transaction. Many were just moments of endurance. The lamps flicker above you as you pause, listening to the silence. For a brief stretch of night, you too are caught in the waiting, standing still as Rome breathes around you. You sense the women's voices, their laughter, their sighs. You feel the monotony pressing against you like a weight, and you realize that boredom, mundane, inescapable boredom, was as much a part of their story as any brothel or tavern. The silence of waiting drifts behind you as you keep walking, but boredom, as you realize, was never the only companion these women carried. Rome's prostitutes had to guard themselves constantly against disease, against unwanted pregnancies, against curses whispered by rivals or angry clients. Every step, every coin, every glance held risk. Survival here meant more than attracting customers. It meant building a fragile shield of tricks, charms, and sheer ingenuity. You stop in front of a stall lit by a single wavering lamp. A woman crouches over a tray of herbs and powders, her hands moving quickly as she sorts little bundles wrapped in twine. The smell is sharp: basil, rue, garlic, and something bitter you can't quite name. She's no ordinary vendor. She's a healer, or at least she claims to be, selling her remedies to women who can't afford to gamble with their bodies. The mainstream fact: Roman prostitutes, like other women of their class, turned to herbal remedies as contraception or treatment. Silphium, a now extinct plant from Cyrene, was prized as both seasoning and contraceptive. It was so valued that its image appeared on coins, yet it vanished from over-harvesting. By the time of the Empire, substitutes like asafoetida, pennyroyal, and rue were used instead. Their effectiveness remains debated, but the need was clear. Avoiding pregnancy meant avoiding disaster. You picture a woman dropping silphium seeds into wine, whispering a prayer to Venus as she sips. Another chews bitter pennyroyal, wincing at the taste but swallowing determination along with it. Historians still argue whether these plants worked consistently, but even uncertainty was better than nothing in a world where childbirth could mean poverty or death. A quirky tidbit makes you grin despite the seriousness: crocodile dung. Borrowed from Egyptian traditions, it was sometimes used as a pessary. Packed inside to act as a barrier, you can't help but laugh. Imagine trying to focus on a lure while knowing that was your secret defense. "You smell odd tonight," a client might say, and the woman replying flatly, "Don't worry about it." Ancient ingenuity, sometimes more creative than comfortable. You step closer to the herb seller's stall and see tiny amulets laid out beside the bundles. Bronze phalluses, small carved eyes, miniature fists with thumb tucked between fingers, the Roman manus feca gesture meant to ward off the evil eye. These charms weren't mere trinkets, they were shields against bad luck, curses and jealous rivals. In a world where magic and medicine intertwined, carrying a charm was as vital as carrying a coin. One woman you notice fingers her necklace anxiously, the charm glinting in the lamplight. Perhaps she believes it keeps disease away, or perhaps it's simply a habit, like modern people rubbing a lucky coin in their pocket. Faith, superstition, and survival all blend seamlessly in her gesture. Historians debate whether Roman prostitutes had access to physicians. Wealthy courtesans may have paid doctors discreetly, but most women relied on herbalists, midwives, or their own knowledge. Medical texts survive with recipes for contraceptives and treatments for venereal diseases, but whether the poorest women ever saw those texts is uncertain. The gap between theory and practice yawns wide, and most evidence suggests trial, error, and whispered advice carried from woman to woman. You imagine them sharing secrets in the quiet hours. "Drink this tea of rue," one advises, "but not too much, or it will make you ill." Another warns, "Burn this incense near your bed, it keeps fevers away." Some cures worked, some were harmless, some dangerous. Knowledge was as risky as ignorance. Another odd detail: some prostitutes carried small lead tablets inscribed with protective spells, called deficciones. These cursed tablets were often buried under thresholds or hidden in walls. A woman might inscribe, "May my rival lose her voice, may her customers shun her," scratching words of desperation into soft metal. Others begged the gods for protection against violent men. You picture the ritual: etching words by lamplight, folding the tablet, whispering to Mercury or Venus, then burying it under the floor. Ancient insurance policies written in lead. You pause as you see a young woman standing outside a doorway, clutching an amulet carved in bone. Her eyes close for a moment, lips moving silently. Perhaps she's praying to Venus for good fortune, or to Mercury for shrewd customers, or to any god willing to listen. You realize that survival wasn't only physical but psychological. The charm gave her courage, whether or not it held power. Humor flickers even here. Imagine a woman teasing her rival. Your amulet's crooked, no wonder your customers left. Or another joking that crocodile dung was better at keeping men away than disease. Sarcasm thrived even in the face of danger. It was, after all, another shield. Yet beneath the jokes lies the sobering truth. Disease haunted these streets. Infections spread easily, pregnancies brought danger, violence was always near. Tricks and remedies were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Every herb chewed, every charm worn, every whispered spell was part of the daily calculation. Survive today, survive tonight, survive until morning. Historians still argue whether Roman prostitutes had higher mortality rates than other women, but logic suggests they did. Exposure, exhaustion, and lack of medical care piled onto already fragile lives, and yet they endured, generation after generation, each inheriting the tricks of survival from those who came before. You feel the weight of it as you move past the stall. The scent of herbs lingers on the air, bitter and sharp, mixed with incense smoke. You picture the women slipping charms into their tunics, chewing seeds, murmuring prayers. You picture their laughter masking fear, their sarcasm shielding anxiety. And you realize these tricks weren't superstitions alone. They were acts of defiance, small ways of fighting back against a world stacked against them. The lamps flicker as you walk deeper into the night. Rome hums around you, laughter, footsteps, the shuffle of dice. But beneath it all, you sense the heartbeat of resilience, tricks, charms, remedies, curses. Fragile shields, yes, but shields nonetheless. And in those shields lies the quiet genius of survival. The night carries you farther, past the herb stalls and charms, into a quarter where the air feels heavier. The laughter of taverns fades, the whispers of doorways grow sharper, and suddenly the tone shifts from survival tricks to the cold reality of Roman law. Because for all the perfumes and graffiti, for all the jokes and shrines, prostitution in Rome was also a matter of paperwork, taxes, and relentless regulation. You stop at a corner where a man in a dark cloak leans against a wooden table stacked with wax tablets. His expression is stern, and the women who approach him do so reluctantly, purses in hand. This is no ordinary merchant, he's a tax collector, and tonight he represents the law. The mainstream fact comes sharply into focus. Roman prostitutes were legally required to register with the aediles, magistrates who oversaw public morality and markets. Once a woman declared herself a meretrix on the rolls, her status was permanent. No matter how wealthy she became, no matter if she later married or retired, the stigma never vanished. She was marked, legally and socially, forever. You watch as a woman hands over her coins, muttering under her breath. The collector scratches a note onto his tablet, nods, and waves her away. She turns sharply, cloak swishing, but the tightness in her shoulders betrays her frustration. Taxes drain her already slim earnings, enriching the state while trapping her identity in stone. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk even as the weight of it sinks in. Emperor Caligula once imposed a special tax on prostitutes, and rumor has it he calculated it based on how many clients they served per day. Imagine trying to log that on an ancient receipt. Today, 5 senators, 2 soldiers, 1 gladiator, tax due accordingly. Bureaucracy has always had a dark sense of humor. You step closer to listen. Another woman protests the fee, insisting he had barely any customers this week. The collector shrugs. Regulation doesn't care about slow nights. Taxes are due regardless of fortune. Historians still argue whether these taxes were seen as legitimizing the trade or as exploitation disguised as legality. Some say the rolls gave women a kind of protection, ensuring they couldn't be prosecuted for their work. Others insist the rolls were nothing more than a scarlet letter, branding them for life. You imagine the tension of registration itself. A young woman, perhaps forced by poverty or a pimp, stepping into the magistrate's office. She speaks her name, age, and declares her intent. The magistrate scratches the details onto a tablet, sealing her fate. From that moment on, she is meretrix. The permanence of that label is crushing. You can almost hear the iron door closing behind her. Another oddity surfaces from your memory. Not only women, but men too, could be registered prostitutes. Male sex workers existed in Rome, often catering to other men, though the stigma was equally heavy. Their names too were etched onto the rolls, ensuring that no amount of wealth or status could erase their past. Rome's bureaucracy was efficient but never merciful. You pass a wall with faint graffiti, this time not playful, but biting. Once a meretrix, always a meretrix, it reads. The phrase is blunt, cruel, and true in the eyes of Roman law. No redemption, no forgetting. The permanence of shame carved deeper than any fresco. Humor creeps back in when you imagine Romans filing tax forms like modern workers. Occupation, meretrix, number of clients this month, 12, deductions, 0. You chuckle darkly, knowing full well the absurdity of combining human intimacy with bureaucratic paperwork, yet Rome excelled at such contradictions. Historians still argue whether registration protected prostitutes from abuse by giving them a recognized status. Some point out that registered women were less likely to be prosecuted for immorality, since the law acknowledged their trade. Others counter that the stigma left them vulnerable, stripping them of legal recourse if wronged. It's a paradox. Visibility both shielded and exposed them. You imagine a woman at the end of a long night, counting her coins, then subtracting the portion owed to the state. Her sigh is heavier than her purse. She might mutter, "Even Venus takes less from me than the aedile does." The others laugh bitterly, but the truth stings. Taxes turned survival into a treadmill. Work harder, pay more, never escape. Another quirky detail. Certain Roman satirists joked that pimps loved the registration system because it legitimized their employees. A pimp could parade into court, point to the rolls and say, "See, she's official." You shake your head at the absurdity. Bureaucracy weaponized against the very people it was supposed to regulate. You pause near a small shrine tucked into an alcove, its lamp flickering weakly. A prostitute kneels there, whispering quickly before hurrying off to meet the tax collector. You realize the shrines and the ledgers weren't separate worlds. One moment praying for luck, the next paying the state. Sacred and profane, tangled as always. As you continue walking, you see other ways the law shadowed these women. They were barred from marrying senators or equestrians, forever excluded from Rome's upper serfs. Please. Their children carried stigma too, marked by their mother's registration. The rolls extended shame not only across a lifetime, but across generations. Historians still debate whether any women managed to erase their names from the rolls. Some stories suggest wealthy courtesans bribed officials, buying back their respectability. Others insist the records were ironclad. The evidence is murky, but the dominant truth remains. Once written, the label stuck. You stop in front of a tavern where laughter bursts through the doorway. The contrast is sharp. Inside, men drink and joke freely, enjoying the company of women whose taxes keep the system running. Outside, those same women are branded, stigmatized, and drained by law. Rome's contradictions feel heavier than the night air. Yet humour surfaces even here. Imagine a prostitute turning to the tax collector with mock sweetness. "If I'm paying you so much, shouldn't I get a loyalty card?" Or another quipping, "At least Venus doesn't send auditors." Laughter once again softens the sting of injustice. You continue onward, the echo of coin clinks and scratching styluses following you. Rome's law was efficient, relentless, and deeply hypocritical. It tolerated prostitution, taxed it, even relied on it, while simultaneously branding its workers with permanent shame. The women endured because what else could they do? Survival required compliance. The lamps sputter as you leave the quarter, but the image lingers in your mind, a woman handing over her coin, her name etched into a wax tablet, her life reduced to a ledger entry. Rome, city of marble and glory, also city of taxes and stigma. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the weight of bureaucracy pressing down as surely as the night. The streets open wider as you leave the tax quarter behind, and with that widening comes a change in atmosphere. No longer the narrow alleys of taverns or the cramped stone corridors of lupanars. Here the villas rise high, their walls gleaming faintly in lamplight, their doorways guarded by slaves who glance at you with silent calculation. These are the homes of Rome's elite, where prostitution takes on a different mask. The women here are not yawning in doorways or haggling with drunkards. They are courtesans, companions, lovers, even muses, and their relationships with powerful men ripple far beyond the bedroom. A mainstream fact anchors you. Roman history is littered with stories of famous courtesans who influenced politics, literature, and scandal. Unlike the anonymous streetwalkers, their names survived in poems and gossip because they were tied to emperors, generals, or celebrated poets. To Rome's moralists, they were symbols of corruption. To their patrons, they were prizes, confidants, or necessary distractions. You picture one such woman reclining in a marble atrium, the floor mosaic glittering with coloured stones. Her tunic is dyed a costly shade of Tyrian purple, illegal for commoners, but flaunted here by someone backed by a wealthy patron. A harp leans against the wall, suggesting that when she isn't entertaining physically, she sings or recites poetry. Her beauty is carefully composed, but her true allure lies in her wit. When senators tire of their wives' piety, they come here for laughter sharpened like a blade. The quirky tidbit comes with a name, Cytheris. Once a slave actress, she became the mistress of Marcus Antonius. Yes, that Marcus Antonius, ally of Julius Caesar and rival of Octavian. Cytheris scandalized Rome by riding beside Antonius in his chariot like a wife, openly flaunting her role. The public gasped, the poets scribbled verses, and yet she remained a fixture of elite circles for years. Imagine the gossip at dinner parties. Did you see Antonius parading with her again? It was both shocking and irresistible. You stroll past a villa where muffled music floats through the air, lyres and flutes blending into something soft. Behind these walls, courtesans are not merely prostitutes, they are entertainers. They serve wine, they dance, they recite lines from Virgil or Catullus. Their performances are part of the seduction. The coin exchanged is heavier than any brothel's rate, but the unspoken currency, status, influence, access, is worth even more. Historians still argue whether these women wielded real power or were simply well-paid pawns. Some, like Cytheris, seemed to move political chess pieces. Others vanished from record the moment their patrons tired of them, but even fleeting influence left ripples, whispered advice, pillow talk, or simply distracting a powerful man long enough to sway his decisions. You smirk at another oddity. Some poets wrote entire elegies to prostitutes, elevating them to muses. Propertius and Ovid blurred the line between courtesan and goddess in their verses, praising women whose profession was technically disdained. Imagine a senator condemning prostitution by day, then quoting poetry about his courtesan's beauty by night. Hypocrisy wasn't just tolerated, it was fashionable. Inside one villa, you imagine a banquet in full swing. Reclining couches circle a low table, platters of roasted meats and bowls of figs clutter the space, and wine flows freely. Among the guests, courtesans laugh, their laughter practiced to rise above the din. One slips a witty remark into a political debate, making the men roar with amusement. Another plucks a stringed instrument, her song blurring the line between art and flirtation. For a few hours they are equals in the room, their wit holding as much weight as any senator's speech, but outside those walls, stigma lingers. No matter how wealthy or skilled, a registered courtesan could never fully escape her legal branding. She might dine with emperors, but in the eyes of the law, she was still a meretrix. The paradox gnaws at you, exalted in private, scorned in public, yet never ignored. Historians still debate whether elite courtesans could marry their patrons. Some evidence suggests wealthy men occasionally freed and married former prostitutes, especially if love or loyalty endured. But official records rarely honored those unions. The stain of registration meant true social respectability was nearly impossible. The courtesans lived in a twilight zone, celebrated, envied, condemned, and forever precarious. Humour sneaks in when you picture the conversations at those banquets. A courtesan rolling her eyes at a senator's pompous story, then quipping, "Tell me again how brave you were, this time without spilling your wine." The table erupts in laughter, and the senator flushes, but laughs too. You realize that part of their allure was their ability to puncture egos, to provide the honesty wives were rarely allowed to voice. Another quirky tidbit. Some courtesans were rumoured to charge not only for companionship, but for silence. A senator might pay as much to keep his indiscretions unspoken as he did for the evening itself. In that way, prostitutes became guardians of secrets, wielding more power in their silence than in their words. You step further down the avenue, the villas looming on either side. Slaves move silently at the doors, carrying trays of wine, adjusting torches. From within, you catch glimpses of silk, gold, and the shimmer of bracelets. Courtesans here live in luxury compared to their street corner sisters, but you sense the fragility beneath the glamour. Their wealth depends entirely on a patron's favour, their security vanishing too. The moment boredom sets in. The contrast gnaws at you. Earlier you saw women yawning under arches, waiting for a single coin. Here laughter echoes over marble floors as women sparkle in jewellery gifted by generals. Yet both groups share the same label, the same permanence of stigma. The hierarchy is stark, but the law makes no exceptions. Historians still debate whether courtesans envied or pitied their poorer counterparts. Perhaps both. They may have seen in the streetwalkers a past they'd escaped or a future they might fall back into if fortune soured. The ladder was steep but slippery, and one misstep could send even the most celebrated courtesan tumbling down. You pause beneath a torch sconce, letting the warmth flicker across your face. Behind you, the night of brothels and taverns feels distant, almost muted. Ahead, the villas hum with a different energy, softer, more polished, but equally entangled with the city's heartbeat. You realize you are walking through two Romes at once, one of shadows and coins, another of marble and poetry, and at the center of both, women whose lives were defined by desire, yet whose influence stretched far beyond it. You tighten your cloak and step onward, the sound of lyres and laughter fading behind you. Courtesans and streetwalkers, palaces and arches, two sides of the same coin, flipped endlessly in Rome's restless night. The villas fade into the distance, their torches flickering like distant stars, and once again the streets narrow. Rome is a patchwork quilt, grand marble squares stitched unevenly to shabby alleys. As you turn into one such alley, you begin to sense another layer of this city's nighttime economy, not strictly brothel, not strictly courtesan. Here, dancers, musicians, and fortune-tellers mingle with prostitutes, the lines blurred until you can no longer tell where entertainment ends and intimacy begins. A mainstream fact anchors you. In Rome, sex work often overlapped with performance. Women and men who played flutes, danced at banquets, or told fortunes in taverns frequently sold sexual services alongside their primary trade. The Latin word scorta could describe both entertainers and prostitutes, showing how closely the professions intertwined. For the Romans, it was all part of the spectacle. You pause at a corner where a small crowd has gathered around a dancer. She twirls with ribbons trailing from her wrists, her steps quick, her hips swaying in rhythm with a drum tapped by a companion. Her laughter bubbles above the beat, her eyes flashing toward the men in the circle. The performance is light-hearted, but the undertone is unmistakable. When the ribbons fall still, she takes a bow, coins clinking into her basket. Yet you know some of those coins are not just for the dance. They are an invitation for something more behind the curtain. A quirky tidbit makes you grin. Some Roman entertainers carried castanets carved from ivory or bone, clicking them in time with their hips. Satirists mocked this as a kind of audition for customers, suggesting that the rhythm of the music mirrored the rhythm of later encounters. Imagine the joke. She never missed a beat. You smirk, realizing Romans were no strangers to innuendo. You continue along and encounter a fortune teller. Seated on a low stool, her lap spread with worn tablets covered in scratched symbols. A man leans forward as she traces his palm, whispering promises of wealth, victory, and love. But when her eyes dart briefly to his purse, you know the fortune has layers. Many such women offered companionship along with prophecy, your future revealed, your loneliness soothed, all for a handful of coins. Historians still argue whether fortune-telling was considered part of prostitution or a separate trade. The overlap was undeniable but not always formalized. Some women used fortune-telling as a way to lure clients subtly. Others practiced sincerely, weaving belief and survival into one act. In either case, mystery was part of the allure. Music floats down from a tavern ahead. You step inside to find a young man strumming a lyre while a woman sings. Her voice is not polished but raw, carrying over the clatter of dice and cups. Men cheer, some throwing coins into her basket, others reaching to tug her sleeve. She smiles coyly, weaving through the crowd, her song breaking into laughter as she slips onto a customer's lap. The performance continues seamlessly from stage to table. Another odd tidbit. Some entertainers specialized in bawdy songs, verses full of double meanings that had the crowd roaring. Imagine lyrics about a cucumber that definitely wasn't about vegetables, or jokes about ploughing that had nothing to do with farming. Romans loved wordplay, and taverns rang with laughter at such jokes, even as the songs doubled as subtle advertisements for the singers' services. You settle into a shadowy corner, observing how fluid these roles are. Dancer, singer, fortune-teller, prostitute, they are not separate identities but shifting masks. A woman might sing at the start of the night, pour wine an hour later, tell fortunes at midnight and vanish behind a curtain by dawn. The adaptability is survival itself, each skill another net to catch coins in a city where luck is fickle. Humor flickers through when you imagine a sarcastic exchange, a fortune-teller telling a customer, "Your future is bright if you pay first," or a dancer quipping, "Don't clap too loudly or I'll raise my prices." Laughter, teasing, wit, these were as much tools of the trade as perfume or jewelry. Historians still debate whether elite Romans looked down more on entertainers or prostitutes. Actors and dancers were technically infames, socially disreputable, just like prostitutes. Yet, paradoxically, both groups were endlessly in demand. A banquet without music felt flat. A tavern without laughter died quickly. Society mocked them publicly but depended on them privately. That contradiction beats like a drum through Roman culture. You picture a grand feast where entertainers flitted among couches, their songs fueling the rhythm of drinking, their glances promising more afterward. Some were hired specifically for both roles, dance during dinner, linger in the atrium afterward. Patrons blurred the line deliberately, ensuring the evening's entertainment satisfied every sense. Another quirky tidbit: mimes. Not the silent performers we imagine today, but bawdy Roman mimes, full of crude jokes and lewd gestures. Many female mimes doubled as prostitutes, their comic performances acting as advertisements. Picture a woman making exaggerated jokes about lust in front of a crowd, then winking at a patron who laughed hardest. The performance was foreplay. As the night deepens, you realize the genius of this blended profession. Entertainment provided cover, plausible deniability in public, flexibility in private. A woman could claim she was only a singer, only a dancer, even while her reputation whispered otherwise. The blurred lines gave her both freedom and danger, depending on who was watching. Historians still argue whether women in these roles suffered the same permanent stigma as brothel prostitutes. Some suggest that entertainers could hide behind their art, maintaining a thin veneer of respectability. Others insist the gossip was too sharp, the overlap too blatant. What is clear is that Rome consumed them eagerly, caring little about definitions as long as the night remained lively. You pause outside a small stage set up in a square. A dancer leaps, skirts swirling, while a flute trills high and quick. The crowd claps in rhythm, cheering. Children even watch, laughing at the spectacle. Yet when the dance ends, the crowd thins quickly, leaving only a handful of men lingering. The dancer smiles knowingly, steps down, and disappears with them into the shadows. Performance complete, business begins. You smile to yourself, realizing you've been watching the oldest variety show in history. Music, dance, fortune, intimacy, all rolled into one evening's entertainment. For the Romans, there was no sharp boundary between these worlds. Life was performance, performance was commerce, and commerce was desire. The lamps flicker lower, and you draw your cloak tighter. Behind you, laughter rises from taverns, ribbons flutter in dancers' hands, songs echo faintly into the night. Ahead, darker alleys beckon, promising new glimpses into this endless mosaic. You step forward, realizing that every turn reveals another role, another mask, another layer of how Rome's women survived and thrived in the restless heartbeat of the city. You wander deeper into Rome's restless heart, past the alleys of dancers and singers, until the streets grow quieter again. Yet the silence here doesn't soothe, it weighs heavy because you begin to see what lies beneath the glitter. Behind every lamp-lit doorway and marble atrium, there are others who profit more than the women themselves: pimps, landlords, tavern owners, the invisible architects of this economy. For every coin tossed into a courtesan's hand, there are two hands already reaching to snatch it away. A mainstream fact sets the tone. Prostitution in Rome was rarely independent. Many women worked under a leno, pimp, or lena, female pimp, who controlled their schedules, took the lion's share of profits, and sometimes even registered them with the state. Landlords profited too, renting cramped rooms at inflated rates, knowing exactly what kind of business would pay the rent. Even tavern owners cut their share, charging fees for back rooms and keeping women under contract. The system bled the prostitutes at every turn. You imagine a woman counting her earnings at the end of the night, 10 coins in her palm, but immediately 3 vanish into the pimp's hand, 2 more to the tavern keeper, another to the landlord for her room. What remains barely covers food, clothing, and the dreaded tax collector. Her laughter at customers is performance. Her private sigh over lost coins is the truest moment of the evening. The quirky tidbit that floats to you is this: Roman satire occasionally mocked pimps for being professional accountants of desire. They were depicted with tablets in hand, tallying every customer, every fee. Imagine a pimp standing in the corner of a brothel with stylus poised, muttering, "That's 6 asses from Gaius, don't forget to log it." Bureaucracy infecting intimacy again, this time not from the state but from private greed. You pass a doorway and see a man lounging on a stool, arms folded, eyes sharp. He's not here for pleasure, he's watching, guarding, enforcing. A woman slips past him, handing over coins without breaking stride. His smirk widens as he pockets the money. This is the Leno, the middleman who thrives on the labor of others. His presence is everywhere, shadowing the women like a second cloak they can never shrug off. Historians still argue whether all prostitutes worked under pimps or if some managed independence. The evidence suggests a spectrum. Some women struck out alone, but most fell into webs spun by pimps, tavern owners, or landlords. Independence was rare, fragile, and often short-lived. The city itself seemed designed to funnel profits upward. You stop by a tavern and watch as a woman pours wine for a group of laughing men. When she slips into the back room with one, the tavern keeper counts coins behind the counter. Later, when she returns, he casually holds out his hand and she deposits a portion of her earnings. The transaction is quick, unspoken, practiced. Everyone knows the rules, everyone plays the game. Another oddity makes you chuckle despite the bleakness. Some taverns apparently advertised all-inclusive services, wine, food, and companionship bundled together. Customers thought they were getting a bargain. In reality, the tavern owners pocketed the majority, leaving the women with crumbs. Ancient Rome's version of a combo meal, except the fries were always overpriced. You imagine the resentment simmering in the women's hearts. They laughed for customers, but behind closed doors they surely mocked their pimps and landlords. Perhaps they even whispered sarcastic prayers. Mercury, patron of merchants, may you trip the tax collector and choke the tavern keeper on his own olives. Humour, once again, was a form of rebellion. Historians debate whether pimps were ever punished for exploitation. Some legal texts condemn them, calling them dishonourable and untrustworthy. Yet in practice they thrived openly, protected by the very system that taxed the women. Occasionally an especially cruel pimp might face public shame, but for the most part their ledgers grew fat while their employees starved. You picture a woman standing at her landlord's door, coins in hand. He smiles politely as she pays, then raises her rent anyway, knowing she has no choice. The cruelty isn't loud, it's quiet, bureaucratic, suffocating, and yet she endures, adjusting her tunic, lighting her lamp, returning to the doorway to earn the next coin. Another quirky tidbit. Some Roman sources mention women actually buying their own freedom from pimps, paying exorbitant sums over time to escape control. Imagine the bitter irony, years of labour to buy back the life that was already theirs. Liberation had a price tag, and even then stigma remained. The air grows cooler as you keep walking, but the weight of this economic web clings to you. You realize that prostitution in Rome wasn't just about sex or survival. It was about profit structures designed by others. Women bore the labor, the stigma, the risks, while pimps, tavern owners, and landlords skimmed the cream. The system was less about desire than about extraction. Historians still argue whether any of these women ever truly prospered. Some evidence suggests a few did. High-class courtesans with wealthy patrons, clever women who saved enough to open businesses or buy property. But for most, the cycle of earnings and deductions left them barely afloat. The laughter in taverns and the painted frescoes in brothels masked a harsher truth. Profit flowed upward, while survival trickled downward. You smirk when you imagine a satirical sketch of the time. A pimp at a dinner party boasting, "I don't work, my girls do." The crowd laughs, but behind the humour lies bitter recognition. The Romans knew exploitation when they saw it, but their appetite for entertainment outweighed their pity. As you walk, you glance at a wall etched with faint graffiti. Someone scrawled, "Pimps grow rich while we grow thin." The words are crude, the message eternal. Exploitation isn't new, it's ancient, carved into Rome's very stone. The lamps sputter, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. You pull your cloak tight, hearing in your mind the endless clink of coins being divided, some for the woman, more for the men who owned her space, her safety, her very status. Rome prides itself on law, architecture, empire, but beneath the marble lies this machinery, women's bodies converted into wealth for others. And yet, even in this grim web, humour and resilience flickered. A sarcastic prayer, a mocking graffiti, a whispered joke over shared bread. These women endured not only because they had to, but because laughter made the weight bearable. You take a long breath, letting the night air fill your lungs. Ahead, the city still hums, promising more glimpses into its contradictions. Behind you, the shadows of pimps and landlords linger, their ledgers heavy, their greed immortal. You step forward anyway, following the faint glow of lamps toward the next corner of Rome's restless story. The lamps thin out as you leave behind the shadows of pimps and tavern keepers. The streets seem quieter, yet the silence is deceptive because what lingers here is not calm, but judgment. If Rome thrived on its contradictions, one of its cruelest was this. The same society that tolerated prostitution, taxed it, and even relied on it for nightly entertainment, never ceased to scorn the women who lived it. Reputation in Rome was everything, and for prostitutes, reputation was both a weapon and a chain. You pause by a public fountain where a group of men are gathered. Their voices carry in the night, thick with wine. One sneers the word meretrix at a passing woman, not as a neutral label but as an insult. His friends laugh, the sound sharp and cruel. The woman keeps walking, her chin high, but you can see the tension in her shoulders. It's the same word that filled official rolls, yet spat into the street it cuts deeper than any tax. A mainstream fact sets the tone. Prostitutes in Rome were legally classified as infames, a category of dishonor that also included gladiators, actors, and executioners. This status stripped them of many legal protections. They could not bring charges of injury to reputation, they could not testify in court with credibility, and they were forever barred from marrying into the elite. Respectability was not simply difficult to achieve, it was legally impossible. The quirky tidbit, though, is how often satirists used prostitutes as punchlines. Poets like Juvenal and Martial peppered their verses with jokes at women's expense, mocking their greed, their supposed laziness, or their aging looks. One epigram sneers, "She charges 2 asses, but she isn't worth the straw on her bed." You shake your head, realizing that public scorn wasn't just shouted in alleys, it was etched into Rome's literature. Imagine being remembered for centuries only because someone mocked your price in a poem. You continue walking and hear another insult hurled, this time by a matron in fine robes, her voice dripping with disdain as she passes a group of women leaning in a doorway. "Filth," she mutters, clutching her cloak tighter. The irony is sharp. Her husband may well have been one of their clients. Yet in public, wives and matrons performed outrage, upholding the facade of virtue by shaming those who embodied the city's hypocrisy. Historians still argue whether prostitutes internalized this stigma or deflected it with resilience. Some evidence suggests women joked back, mocking their customers in graffiti or gossip. Others suggest the weight of shame pressed heavily, trapping them not only in poverty but in scorn that seeped into every corner of their lives. What's clear is that insults followed them everywhere, from alleys to baths, from taverns to temples. You imagine a woman buying bread in the marketplace. She offers her coin, and the baker accepts it without question. Yet when she turns to leave, someone mutters, "There goes a looper." The word echoes after her like a stone thrown at her back. The bread is hers, but so is the sting of public ridicule. Humour flickers even here, though it is bitter. Picture a prostitute rolling her eyes at an insult, muttering to her friend, "Funny, he didn't complain last night." Laughter becomes rebellion, sarcasm a shield. Wit cuts back where law and respectability cannot. The The contrast strikes you most sharply in the Forum, Rome's heart of politics and commerce. Here, senators thunder about morality, issuing edicts against extravagance, praising the virtues of wives and mothers. Yet everyone in the crowd knows those same senators frequent brothels, keep courtesans, and laugh at tavern jokes. Hypocrisy is not hidden, it is expected. The prostitutes are scapegoats for sins that belong to the entire city. Historians debate whether this stigma ever truly lessened during Rome's centuries of empire. Some argue that during more liberal reigns like that of Caligula or Nero, the stigma softened in practice, if not in law. Others point to the enduring permanence of infamia in legal texts as proof that prostitutes never escaped their branded shame. Either way, the contradiction remained, essential yet despised. Another quirky tidbit: some wealthy Romans used prostitutes as insults against rivals. Calling a senator's daughter or wife a meretrix was slander, even if untrue, because the word carried such potent shame. Lawsuits erupted over these accusations. Imagine the irony. Prostitutes could not sue to defend their reputations, but the elite could weaponize the very word as a political dagger. You stop at a shrine of Janus, the two-faced god, and the symbolism makes you chuckle grimly. Rome itself is Janus-faced toward its prostitutes. One face tolerates, profits, even indulges. The other sneers, condemns, and scorns. Both faces speak at once, leaving the women trapped in a hall of mirrors where their identities are never their own. You picture a woman at dawn, slipping home after a night of work. Children point and giggle. Matrons turn away. Men whisper crude jokes. Her steps are steady, but her eyes are tired, not only from lack of sleep, but from carrying the constant burden of reputation. She might mutter to herself, "At least the coins don't insult me," clinging to humour as armour. Historians still debate whether prostitutes found community within their stigma. Some suggest they formed subcultures bound together by shared exclusion. Others argue they remained fractured, divided by class and competition. Either way, the scorn of the city bound them all, whether courtesan in a villa or streetwalker in an alley. The lamps flicker as you pass another group of men, their laughter ringing sharp. One points at a woman and sneers, "She's cheaper than a loaf of bread." The others howl with amusement. You feel the insults sting even across centuries, yet the woman doesn't falter. She turns, smirks, and replies, "At least I don't go stale by morning." The crowd roars louder, now at the man's expense. For a moment, the balance tips, wit cutting through stigma like a knife. Humour softens the cruelty, but never erases it. The shame of prostitution in Rome was woven into law, literature, and daily insult. It was permanent, inescapable, relentless. And yet the women endured, wielding wit, laughter, and sheer resilience against the tide. You step away from the fountain, the echoes of insults still buzzing in your ears. Ahead, the night stretches on, promising glimpses not only of stigma, but of something else. Moments of resistance, flashes of agency, the small rebellions that kept these women from being swallowed entirely by shame. The lamps guide you forward, and you follow, ready to glimpse the sparks that survived even in the darkest corners of Rome. The streets twist again, and as you follow their curves, you notice something shift in the air. You have seen the scorn, the exploitation, the bureaucracy, but now you begin to glimpse moments of resistance. Rome may have branded prostitutes as infames, stripped them of status, and taxed their every coin, yet still they carved out slivers of control. These were not grand rebellions that toppled laws, but small acts of agency that let them endure, sometimes even thrive, in a world that preferred them silent. You pause at a doorway where two women lean close, whispering. Their voices are low, but the cadence of laughter breaks through the hush. They are sharing something private, a story, a joke, maybe a complaint about a stingy client. In that moment, you see not competitors, but companions. The solidarity may not erase the rivalry, but it creates a bond strong enough to weather nights of insults and dangers. A mainstream fact grounds you. Despite the stigma, some prostitutes did achieve moments of independence. Inscriptions reveal women who saved enough to buy property, run taverns, or even own slaves themselves. While rare, these examples show that agency was not impossible. One epitaph commemorates a woman named Naivalaya Taike, a freedwoman from Pompeii who rose from humble beginnings to become wealthy and respected. Her story whispers a truth Rome tried to bury, that resilience could outlast stigma. The quirky tidbit that makes you grin is this: some women reportedly charged double if clients were rude. Imagine a man swaggering in, boasting about his coin, only to be told, "For you, twice the price." It's a small defiance, but it flips the power dynamic, even if briefly. Humor becomes a toll booth, sarcasm attacks. You wander into a side street where a woman is selling garlands of flowers. At first you assume she's just another vendor, but when she leans closer to a passing man, her tone shifts, her smile sharpens, and you realize the garlands are just her cover. Selling flowers gives her control. It lets her choose when to engage, who to invite, and how to mask her trade behind respectability. The petals hide a negotiation, but they also shield her dignity from casual insult. Historians still argue whether prostitutes forged informal networks of protection. Some evidence suggests women banded together, pooling resources to rent spaces or sharing earnings on slow nights. Others say competition kept them divided. The truth, you suspect, is in the middle. Rivalry was real, but so was friendship. Small alliances, shifting and fragile, may have meant the difference between survival and ruin. You picture the camaraderie of waiting hours, women braiding each other's hair, sharing food, laughing at customers' absurdities. One woman rolls her eyes, mimicking a drunk senator's slurred speech. Another tops her joke with an exaggerated impression of a gladiator bragging about his scars. The laughter rings louder than the insults outside, their voices reclaiming power through humor. Another odd detail surfaces: charms of independence. Some women wore amulets not only for protection, but as symbols of resilience. A bronze phallus might hang from one's neck not just to ward off curses, but as a bold proclamation: yes, I live in this trade and I own it. It is defiance disguised as superstition, agency hidden in plain sight. You stop at a tavern window where a woman leans on the sill, chatting with two soldiers. She tilts her head, eyes glinting, and you realize she's negotiating, not just for coin, but for protection. Soldiers were dangerous clients, but also valuable allies. A prostitute with a loyal soldier could secure safety from rivals or pimps. Agency takes many forms: wit, negotiation, alliances forged in smoky tavern corners. Historians debate whether prostitutes shaped public opinion through graffiti. Some inscriptions praise women by name, others curse rivals. Did the women themselves carve those words? If so, graffiti wasn't only a tool of clients, but a weapon of self-advertisement and defense. Imagine a woman scratching her name into plaster. Livia is the best in this district. Was it boastful? Certainly. Was it effective? Almost definitely. You picture another scene. A woman refusing a client outright. Though poor, though desperate, she shakes her head and turns away. The man mutters insults, but she stays firm. Agency here is not grandiose, but it is powerful. A reminder that even in a system designed to consume her, she still holds the choice to say no. The humor resurfaces when you imagine sarcastic retorts that flipped the power balance. A man brags about his stamina, and the woman replies, "Your wife must be so relieved you come here." Another claims he deserves a discount, and she counters, Then I'll give you a discount performance. The crowd roars, the man flushes, and the moment belongs to her. Historians still argue whether prostitutes found pride in their craft. Some sources suggest women described themselves as skilled in inscriptions, claiming excellence at what they did. Others argue these were survival boasts, not true pride. Yet the fact they were carved at all suggests an ember of self-worth glowed even in the margins. Another quirky tidbit: some freed women who had once been prostitutes chose to continue the trade even after gaining independence, not because they were forced to, but because they preferred the income or the lifestyle. Imagine the scandal that caused Rome's moralists horrified at the idea of choice where they expected shame. And yet the women shrugged and carried on, their defiance a louder statement than any senator's decree. You walk further, the lamps thinning, the night air cooling. In your mind's eye you see the mosaic of small resistances, women sharing bread and laughter, scratching names into walls, charging double for rudeness, wearing charms with pride, refusing clients when they could, building networks of protection. These are not tales of grand rebellion, but of human stubbornness. Rome may have branded them, mocked them and taxed them, but it never erased their will to endure. The city hums softly around you now, quieter than before. You feel the echoes of resilience in every step, as though the cobblestones themselves remember the women who once claimed small victories here. They were not free, not respected, but they were not voiceless either. You pull your cloak close, smiling faintly at the thought of a sarcastic retort shouted into the night, a bit of graffiti carved defiantly, a charm worn proudly. These are the sparks of agency, flickering in the dark, refusing to be snuffed out by Rome's hypocrisy. And as you walk onward, you realize those sparks still glow, centuries later, carried in the very stories you now uncover. The street grows quieter still, as if the city itself is winding down. You feel your sandals scrape against the uneven stones, and ahead you glimpse ruins, fragments of walls, broken columns, scattered tiles half buried in dust. It is here, in these remains, that the faintest voices of Rome's prostitutes linger. For while laws and poems recorded scorn, it is archaeology that whispers their daily lives most clearly. A mainstream fact sets the frame. In Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered a fully preserved lupanar, the only one of its kind to survive intact. Its walls were painted with frescoes depicting sexual acts, its rooms small and bare, its stone beds still in place. The site offers a rare window into the physical environment where prostitutes lived and worked. Every broken oil lamp, every scrawled inscription is a trace of human survival. You kneel by a crumbling wall, running your hand over faint red pigment. The fresco once showed a reclining couple. Now it's little more than a blur of shapes. Yet even in decay, the intention is clear. Art created not for beauty but for commerce, an ancient advertisement. Historians still argue whether these images were chosen by the women, the brothel owners, or the painters themselves. Were they empowerment, instruction, or exploitation? The walls stay silent, leaving the debate open. The quirky tidbit that makes you smirk. Some oil lamps unearthed in brothels were carved into the shape of phalluses. Imagine lighting your workroom every night with a flame emerging from such a lamp. Practical, yes, but also absurd. A reminder that humour threaded through even the most transactional spaces. You picture a woman chuckling as she trimmed the wick, muttering, "Well, at least the lamp is reliable." You stand and wander further. A collapsed roof reveals a courtyard where a mosaic of Venus once gleamed. Only fragments remain now, the curve of a shoulder, the shimmer of shell tiles. Yet the symbolism is potent. Venus, goddess of love and desire, presided over these spaces. her image watching as women worked, prayed, or simply endured. It blurs sacred and profane once more, as though Rome itself never decided where one ended and the other began. Historians debate the meaning of graffiti preserved in these ruins. Some inscriptions are glowing endorsements. Myrtis pleases all, others are insults. Novellia is old and cheap. Still others are simple boasts. I had Claudia for 2 asses. Were these the voices of customers, or sometimes the women themselves scribbling names to stay remembered? Archaeology offers no certainty, only clues that both pride and mockery stained the same walls. You pause at a doorway barely wide enough for one person. The threshold stone is grooved from centuries of sandals stepping over it. Inside, the room is tiny, barely large enough to stretch your arms. You see the impression of a bed frame long gone and a hollow in the wall where a lamp once sat. The silence here is heavy, yet not empty. You imagine the echoes of conversations, laughter forced or genuine, sighs of exhaustion, the scraping of coins onto stone. Time stripped the people away, but the space still hums with memory. Another quirky detail emerges from excavations. In some brothels, phallic symbols were carved into the street pavement outside, arrows pointing toward the entrance. They functioned as signposts for customers who might otherwise get lost in the maze of alleys. You grin, picturing a drunk Roman staggering along, following the trail of phalluses like a very adult treasure hunt. Archaeology reveals not only survival, but comedy etched into the very streets. You kneel again and pick up a shard of pottery lying half buried in dust. It is plain, undecorated, perhaps once part of a cheap cup or bowl. Yet it, too, tells a story. Women ate meals here, shared food between clients, perhaps scraped stew from bowls while joking about the men who came and went. The artifacts of daily life remind you that behind the transactions were human beings, tired, hungry, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent. Historians still argue about how brothel spaces were used. Some claim the frescoes were literal advertisements. Pick your act, pay your coin. Others believe they were decorative, symbols of a trade everyone already understood. Were the rooms exclusively for prostitutes, or did they double as homes? The lines blur, leaving modern scholars to guess at details that were obvious to Romans but lost to time. You rise and walk further among the ruins. A collapsed ceiling exposes a narrow staircase leading up to a loft. Perhaps a keeper lived here, watching over the women, counting profits at night. Perhaps a prostitute herself used the loft as a rare private space, a corner to breathe between clients. You'll never know, but archaeology tempts imagination, pulling ghosts into focus from broken stone. Another oddity unearthed in Pompeii, curse tablets buried in the ground, scratched with pleas to the gods. Some call for rivals to lose beauty, others for clients to be generous. These depictions are fragments of desperation and hope, preserved in lead. You imagine a woman crouching by lamplight, scratching words onto metal. Venus, may my rival's customers leave her bed for mine. Was it superstition? Survival? Both. The tablet survives, the woman's name does not, but her voice trembles faintly through the centuries. The humour flickers even here. One graffito preserved in Pompeii reads, "Pr0stitutes has had many girls here all at once," you snores. Tea softly. Was it a boast, a joke, or simply wishful thinking? The wall cannot answer, but its cheekiness lingers, as timeless as any bathroom stall scrawl today. You step back, letting your gaze sweep over the ruins. The oil lamps, frescoes, graffiti, pottery, all fragments. Yet together they weave a picture more intimate than any official record. Historians reconstruct laws and taxes, poets mock and moralize, but archaeology hums with the texture of lived life. The chipped edge of a cup, the smear of red paint, the scratch of a name, they outlasted emperors. Historians still argue whether archaeology romanticizes these women or restores them. Is a fresco of Venus empowerment or objectification? Is graffiti memory or mockery? The debates circle endlessly, but as you stand here, you feel less inclined to theorize. The stones hum with humanity, and that is enough. You take a long breath, the cool night air mixing with the dust of ruins. In your mind, the brothel fills again, lamps lit, frescoes bright, women chatting, customers stumbling in. The echoes swell, then fade. The ruins settle back into silence, but you carry the whispers with you. You turn away, stepping back into the living city. Behind you, the ruins keep their secrets, broken but not mute. Ahead, the Roman night waits with more stories, more contradictions, more lives flickering like lamps against the dark. The ruins recede behind you, and the city night seems to close in like a curtain. The torches burn lower, their flames flickering in the breeze, and you find yourself walking slowly back through the winding alleys, the arches, the taverns, the shrines. Everything you've seen, the doorways, the graffiti, the bargaining voices, the waiting silences, begins to weave together. And now, as twilight deepens into true night, you reflect on the weight of it all, how Rome's prostitutes lived, endured, and left their faint but stubborn echoes across centuries. A mainstream fact presses itself on you as you pass a public square. Prostitution was not a marginal phenomenon in Rome, but an institution. It was everywhere, under arches, in taverns, beside markets, in villas, even in ruins now preserved in ash. Far from hidden, it was integrated into the city's very heartbeat. No citizen could truly claim ignorance. Rome's grandeur was marble and law, but also the nightly hum of its underworld economy. You remember the shrines tucked in brothel corners, offerings to Venus and Priapus, and realize again how the sacred and the profane coexisted without shame. Romans prayed for divine favor even as they haggled over prices. They laughed at bawdy frescoes, carved crude graffiti, and offered coins to gods with the same hands they used to pay prostitutes. Historians still argue whether this reflected hypocrisy or honesty. Perhaps it was both. A quirky tidbit slips in like a wink before sleep. Archaeologists once found a small bronze wind chime shaped like multiple phalluses dangling from chains, hung in a brothel doorway. Called a tintinnabulum, it jingled when the breeze blew, warding off evil and advertising business all at once. Imagine walking past and hearing the cheerful chime, thinking, "Oh, that's where the fun is tonight." Rome turned even wind into marketing. You pause beneath an archway, remembering the hierarchy you traced, the poorest streetwalkers waiting in the cold, courtesans reclining in villas, entertainers weaving songs into seduction. All of them carried stigma, all branded with infamia, yet their daily realities could not have been more different. One might eat figs from a golden dish, another chew stale bread in a tavern corner. Yet both knew the permanence of shame once their names entered the rolls. Historians still argue whether this shame was felt as deeply as law suggested. Did prostitutes walk the streets burdened by despair, or did they shrug off the insults with laughter and wit? Some evidence suggests resilience outweighed sorrow. The graffiti boasting "Athos is worth every coin" feels more like pride than despair. Perhaps their reputations were wounds, but also armor. You picture again the survival tricks: silphium swallowed with wine, pennyroyal chewed bitterly, charms worn against the evil eye, cursed tablets buried under thresholds. These details feel strangely intimate, moments when women took control of what little they could. A crocodile dung pessary may sound absurd to you now, but for them it was a lifeline, a desperate but clever attempt to control fate. Survival was ingenuity disguised as superstition. Another odd detail makes you smile faintly. Some graffiti revealed prostitutes mocking their clients. One inscription reads, "I serviced Tiberius. He paid little." Brutal honesty carved for all to see. Imagine the mortified man realizing his stinginess was now immortalized on a wall. Humor could wound sharper than any knife. As you walk, your cloak brushing the stones, you realize how much wit served as rebellion. When insults were hurled in the forum, women answered with sarcasm. When pimps skimmed their earnings, women joked about loyalty cards. When customers bragged, women deflated them with cutting remar. Queso's humor did not erase exploitation, but it gave back a sliver of power. Historians still debate whether prostitutes felt community or isolation. The evidence shows both alliances and rivalries, gossip and solidarity. You picture two women sharing bread in the waiting hours, whispering prayers together at a shrine, then later competing for the same client. Life was contradiction, just as Rome itself was contradiction. You turn toward the main thoroughfare where lamplight spills more brightly, and you hear faint music drifting from a villa. Courtesans laugh behind silk curtains, soldiers stagger toward taverns, pimps count coins in shadow. The whole mosaic of Roman night stretches before you one last time. It is chaotic, merciless, and strangely vibrant. And as you walk, you feel the ghosts of those women pressing around you. Not tragic victims, not glamorous muses, but human beings with jokes, fears, dreams, and scars. They lived in a world that scorned them, but they carved their names into walls, etched their images into frescoes, and left artifacts that whisper still. That resilience hums beneath your feet as you trace the city's veins back towards silence. Another quirky fragment to close. Archaeologists found a ring inscribed with the words Felicitas Temporum, good times. Was it a gift from a client, a joke among women, a motto worn like armor? Whatever its origin, it speaks to the small rebellions of joy they claimed. Even in the darkest margins, they grasped at felicity. You finally stop, the city dimming around you. You have wandered through markets and taverns, shrines and ruins, lupanars and villas. You have heard insults shouted and jokes whispered. You have seen exploitation and agency side by side. And now, as dawn edges faintly on the horizon, you let it all settle into memory. The streets grow still, the last lamps guttering low, their flames shrinking into faint glows. The air softens, cooler now, the clamour of Tava is hushed into a distant hum. You breathe deeply, slowly, letting the rhythm of your steps slow to match the city's fading pulse. You picture the women once more, laughing, bargaining, waiting, praying. Their voices drift like echoes across time, not sharp now, but softened like whispers carried on a breeze. The insults, the taxes, the graffiti all blur into the background, leaving only the simple truth. They lived, they endured, they mattered. Your own breathing steadies, each inhale long, each exhale longer. The images blur, arches fading into shadows, frescoes softening into pale colour, mosaics crumbling into gentle dust. The sounds dim too, coins clinking, dice rolling, laughter rising. All recede into silence, like waves pulling back into the sea. You let your shoulders relax, the cloak of the night settling more lightly now. The city is not gone, but it rests, and so do you. The women you've walked beside slip back into their doorways, their shrines, their ruins. Their stories hum faintly, but they no longer press urgently. They simply linger, quiet companions in the stillness. The stars above Rome stretch wider, softer, and your eyes grow heavier. You feel the cool stone beneath your feet give way to the gentle drift of sleep. Every lamp flickers out, every shadow dissolves, until only calm remains. Rest now, breathe slowly, let the ancient city fade behind you, its contradictions folded into quiet memory. You are safe, you are calm, you are drifting into dreams. The Roman night grows silent, and so do you.